Welcome back to Mr. Geronimo. Before we begin tonight's story, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and tell us where you're watching from. There is a cassette in the evidence drawer at the Sugarland station that no one will play all the way through. I know this because I am the one who labeled it, and I am the only living person who has heard the end. I have worn the ranger uniform of the Great Smoky Mountains for 19 years. In that time I have carried out the lost, the broken, the cold, and the dead. I have learned the difference between a person who wandered off a trail and a person who was led off one. The first kind leaves a track that argues with itself, a track that doubles back, panics, climbs when it should descend. The second kind leaves a track that walks straight into the trees with the calm step of a person going home for supper. I have seen both. The second kind is the one that keeps me awake. My grandmother was Cherokee, born in the shadow of these mountains before they were a park, before there were rules about who could walk where. She raised me on stories the way other grandmothers raised children on prayers, and the story she told most often was not a story to frighten me. She told it to keep me safe. She would take my chin in her hand so I had to look at her, and she would say the same words every time. The travelers never take a soul, she told me, they only ask. And in these mountains, child, the most dangerous word you will ever own is yes. She told me this so many times that the words wore a groove in me, the way water wears a groove in stone. And then one autumn, when I was 19 and certain I had outgrown her stories, my grandmother put on her good shawl, told my mother she was going for a walk, and went up into the Smokies and did not come back. We searched for weeks. The whole county turned out. We found nothing. No track that argued with itself, no panic, no fall. We found one thing only, and I have never told anyone what it was. We found her walking shoes, set side by side at the edge of the trees, placed there neatly, the way you set your shoes by the door of a house you are about to enter. She had walked into those mountains in her bare feet, calm as a woman going home for supper, and the trees had closed behind her. I became a ranger 5 years later. I told everyone it was for the love of the land. The truth is that I have spent 19 years walking these ridges hoping to find the door she went through, and praying I never would. I did not understand what she meant. I thought it was a saying about manners. I learned what she meant on the second night of August, at a backcountry camp at the foot of a ridge that does not appear on any map I have ever signed. I was assigned to escort a small group on a 4-day route through the high country. It was a guided trip, the kind the park runs for people who want the wilderness without the danger of doing it alone. There were 6 of them. I read their names off my clipboard at the trailhead and watched each one raise a hand. Adam Simpson was 34, lean and restless, the sort of man who could not stand still while you were talking to him. He had hiked half the country and he wanted me to know it. Beverly Stevens was 60, calm and watchful, with a quietness that made the others lower their voices around her without knowing why. Nathan Tucker was 71, the oldest of them, and the only one who looked at the ridgeline instead of at me when I described where we were going. Heather Porter was 44, the planner, the one with the laminated map and the schedule and the small notebook she filled in at every rest. Douglas Hunter was 54, broad in the shoulders, a hunter by name and by habit, and he had brought along the certainty that he had already seen everything the woods could show him. Alice Hicks was 69, soft-spoken, a little hard of hearing, and she smiled at me as though she already knew something I had not said yet. I gave them the same talk I give every group. Stay together, filter your water, hang your food, do not feed the animals. And then I gave them the part of the talk I do not write in the report, the part my grandmother put into me. If you hear music in these hills, I told them, do not follow it. The music is not for following. The music is sent out to see who will follow. Douglas laughed at that. He said he had never heard a mountain sing. You will, I said, and I meant it as a joke, the way you say a thing to fill a silence. I did not know that I was telling the truth. We walked in good weather for most of the first day. The trail climbed through stands of old hemlock and crossed 2 clear streams. Heather marked our times in her notebook. Adam ranged ahead and came back, ranged ahead and came back, like a dog that cannot believe its luck. Beverly walked beside Alice and matched her slow pace without being asked. Nathan said almost nothing. Once, when we passed a low place where the trees grew strangely even, as if planted in rows, he stopped and looked into the gloom between them for a long moment. You feel that, he said to me. It was not a question. Feel what? I said. He did not answer. He just kept walking. We made camp that first night in a clearing I had used a dozen times before. I knew the place the way you know a room in your own house. I knew where the flat ground was, where the wind came from, where the bears had clawed the bark off a dead pine 3 seasons back. I set them up, I checked the food hang, and I told them I would take first watch out of habit, though there was nothing to watch for. That is when I heard it for the first time. It came from up the ridge, from the place where the trees grew in their unnatural rows. It was a drum, not a loud drum, not a frightening one. A soft, steady heartbeat of a drum, far off, the kind of sound you would have to hold your breath to be sure you were hearing at all. And under the drum, very faint, there were voices. They were singing. The song had no words I could name, but it was warm, and it was glad, and it sounded the way a house sounds when the people inside it love each other. I sat very still. My grandmother had described this sound to me when I was a boy, and I had never believed it was a real sound, only a thing she said to make the story feel true. But there it was, drifting down through the hemlocks, soft and welcoming, and every part of me that was tired and cold wanted to stand up and walk toward it. I did not stand up, but I did turn my head, just once, toward the ridge, and that was a mistake, because for the length of a single heartbeat I saw something that was not there in the daylight. High up the slope, set back among the spruce, there was a glow. It was the warm yellow glow of windows. Many windows, low and long, the windows of a great house or a village of houses pressed into the side of the mountain, and from them came the light of fires and the smell, faint but unmistakable, of bread and meat and wood smoke, the smell of a kitchen on a winter evening. I blinked, and the glow was gone, and there was only the gloom and the trees and the soft, far drumming. But I had seen it. I have seen it every summer since, and I have never once walked toward it. I did not stand up again. Beverly was awake. She came and sat beside me without a word and listened with her head tilted. "That is lovely," she whispered. "Is there a camp up there?" "No," I said. "There is no camp up there. There is nothing up there for 9 miles. She looked at me, and the warmth went out of her face slowly, like water draining from a basin. "Then who is singing?" she said. I did not have an answer that would let her sleep, so I told her it was the wind in the rocks, and she pretended to believe me, and she went back to her tent. But she did not sleep. None of us slept well. The drum went on under everything, soft and patient, all night long, and when the sun came up it stopped. And the morning was so ordinary and bright that I almost let myself forget it. Almost. We broke camp and walked, and that was the day the trail began to lie to us. Heather noticed first, because Heather noticed everything. We reached a junction she had marked at 4 miles. Her notebook said 4 miles. Her watch and her count of paces agreed. But the sign at the junction said we had come 7. We stood there, all 6 of them and me, looking at a wooden sign I had passed 100 times. And the sign was telling us we had walked 3 miles farther than our legs and our clocks knew we had. "Signs get replaced," I said. Somebody updated the mileage. Heather did not write that down. I watched her not write it down, and I understood that she did not believe me and that she was right not to. We pushed on. The trail that should have descended into a cove kept climbing. I had walked it before. I knew it went down. It went up. The hemlocks gave way to a higher forest, to spruce and fir, the kind of forest that grows only on the tallest ridges, and we should not have reached that forest for 2 more days. The air turned cold and clean. The light came through the trees in long pale bars, and somewhere ahead of us, always ahead, never closer, the drum had started again. It was the middle of the afternoon, and the drum was playing in the daylight now, and that was worse than hearing it at night. At night, a thing in the gloom is at least keeping to the rules. In the bright, clean light of that high forest, with the sun on our shoulders, the soft and happy singing came down the slope toward us, and there was nothing in the daylight to hide behind, and so we simply heard it, all of us, and looked at one another, and no one pretended it was the wind. Adam wanted to go to it. He said it lightly, the way you suggest taking a side trail to a view. "There might be people up there," he said. "We could ask them about the trail. We could find out where we are." "We know where we are," I said, which was a lie. And he knew it was a lie. "I want all of you to hear me," I told them, and I made my voice the voice I use when somebody is about to walk off a ledge. "We do not follow that sound. I do not care how kind it is. The kinder it sounds, the farther you stay from it. If you hear someone call your name out of those trees, you do not answer. You do not even turn your head. We walk together, and we walk down, and we get out of this high country before night." Douglas asked me what I thought was up there, and he asked it with a small smile, because he had decided I was a man who told ghost stories to tourists. I thought about my grandmother holding my chin in her hand. "I think it is people who live here," I said. "I think they have always lived here. And I think they are about to offer us something, and I think every one of you needs to know right now, before they ask, that the answer is no." We did not get out of the high country before night. The trail saw to that. It is a hard thing to describe to a person who has not stood inside it. The path did not vanish. The path was always there, plain and well-worn, easy to follow. It simply did not go where it should. We walked downhill and gained elevation. We turned back the way we had come and arrived somewhere new. Heather kept her notebook open in her hand and stopped writing in it, because the numbers had begun to frighten her more than the silence between them. Once, in the long blue hour before night, we came over a rise and the whole high cove opened below us, and there in the bottom of it was a village. I want to be careful with my words here because I know how this sounds. It was not ruins, it was not the old chimneys and rotting cabins you find all over these mountains, left behind when the park took the land. It was a living village. There were long, low houses with smoke rising straight from them. There were people moving between the houses, small with distance, going about the unhurried business of an evening. There were gardens and a great central fire, and the sound of children, and over all of it lay that warm, glad singing, rising up to us in the blue air like the smell of supper. It was the most peaceful thing I have ever seen, and it sat in the bottom of a cove where no village has stood for 100 years, where the maps show nothing but forest, where I myself have walked in full daylight and seen only trees. Adam started down the slope toward it before any of us could speak. I caught him by the pack strap and hauled him back, and he fought me. Not hard, but the way a sleeping man fights the hand that wakes him. "There are people down there," he said. "There is a whole town down there. We can sleep in a bed tonight. What is wrong with you?" "Look again," I told him. "Look without wanting it." And he looked, and I watched him try to count the houses, and I watched him fail, because there were always more, and they were always shifting. The way the things at the edge of a dream shift when you try to hold them still. I watched the wanting drain out of his face and the fear come back, and he stepped away from the edge of the rise on his own. And he did not argue with me again that night. We pushed on into the spruce, and the village stayed below us in the cove, glowing and singing, for a long time, no matter how far we walked, until at last the trees closed it off behind us. And I understood then that it had not been a place we passed. It had been a thing that wanted us to know it was waiting. The light started to fail, and we were higher than when we had started down, and I made the only choice I had left. I told them we would camp, that we would build a good fire, that we would stay close and wait for morning, and that morning would set things right. I did not believe morning would set anything right. But you do not tell 6 frightened people that the mountain has closed its hand around them. You give them a fire and a task and a reason to hold still. We found a flat shelf of ground under a stand of old spruce. There was a ring of stones already there, a fire ring, blackened and used as if 100 camps had been made on that spot. I had never seen it before. It should not have been there, but it was a place to stop, and the others were grateful for it. And Douglas got a fire going with the quick, competent hands of a man who needed something to be good at. That is when we met the first of them. She came out of the trees the way you would walk into your own kitchen. She was an old woman, smaller than Alice, wrapped in a shawl the color of river stones, and she was smiling before we even saw her face. She came right up to the edge of the firelight, and she said good evening to us in plain, clear English. And she told us we looked cold and far from home. I felt every hair on my body stand up. Beverly, who was kind to her bones, started to rise to greet her. I put my hand on Beverly's shoulder and held her down, gently, and I did not take my eyes off the old woman. "We are fine," I said. "We are camped for the night. We thank you, but we need nothing." The old woman's smile did not change. That is the part I cannot forget. A real person, told no by a stranger. Let something cross their face, surprise or hurt or annoyance. The old woman's smile stayed exactly as it was, warm and patient and certain, as if my no was a small thing she had already folded up and put away, because she had heard 1,000 no answers and she knew how the story ended. "There is room by our fire," she said. "It is warmer than this one. There is food. You have walked a long way and you are tired, and we would be glad of your company." She did not say it to me. She said it to all of them. She looked from face to face around our little fire, and as her eyes passed over each one, I watched that person soften. I watched the fear leak out of them and the longing come in. Adam, who had been pale and quiet for an hour, sat up straight and smiled back at her. Alice, who could barely hear me at 3 feet, heard every word the old woman said and leaned toward her like a flower toward a window. "We are fine," I said again louder. "We are not coming with you. Thank you for your kindness. Go back to your fire." The old woman looked at me then, only at me, and for one breath her smile changed after all. It became something older. It became something that had watched my grandmother walk into these mountains and had been glad to see her come. You are her grandson, the old woman said. The one she taught to say no. I could not breathe. I had not told her my name. I had not told her anything. She told us about you, the old woman said, gently, as if she were giving me a gift. She is well. She is happy. She has never been cold again. She sends you her love, and she says it is a pity you learned your lesson so well. And then she turned and walked back into the trees unhurried, and the gloom took her, and she was gone. It was Heather who broke the silence, and she did it in the smallest voice I have ever heard from a grown woman. She asked me how the old woman had known my grandmother. She asked it because it was the one piece of the night she could try to hold, the one thread she thought might lead back to something that made sense. I had no answer for her that made sense. I told her the only true thing I had. I told her that my grandmother had walked into these mountains 30 years ago and had never come out, and that I had just been told, by a thing that cast no shadow, that my grandmother was alive and warm and happy somewhere up that slope, and that the worst part of me, the tired and frightened and lonely part, had wanted with my whole heart to believe it. Heather did not write that down. She closed her notebook and held it against her chest like a child holds a toy. And she did not open it again until the night she set it down on the stone forever. No one spoke for a long time. The fire popped. Somewhere up the slope the drum was playing, and it had grown closer, and now I could hear that it was not one drum but many, and the singing had grown into a great glad chorus, the sound of a whole village at supper, the sound of people who have everything they need and want only to share it. I need to say something to you now, you who are listening to this. You who have walked every step of this trail with me through your speakers in some safe and lighted room. I know you have not pressed that button yet. I know you have not left a single word below this. Do it now, before I tell you the rest, because what comes after this is where I began to lose them, and I would like to know that someone is still beside me when it happens. The first to go was Nathan. He was the oldest, and he had said the least, and I had taken his silence for fear. It was not fear, it was recognition. He had known what these mountains were from the moment we passed the trees that grew in rows, and he had spent 2 days deciding. Sometime in the deep of that second night, while I sat my watch and stared into the fire and tried not to hear the singing, Nathan Tucker stood up from his bedroll, folded his blanket with care, set it on a stone, and walked out of the firelight toward the music. I went after him. I caught his arm at the edge of the trees, and I will tell you, his face was not the face of a man under a spell. His eyes were clear. He knew me. He knew where he was. He patted my hand the way you pat the hand of a child who is trying to keep you from something you have already decided to do. I am 71 years old, son, he said. My knees are gone. My wife is 12 years in the ground. Up there it is warm, and there is music, and nobody is old. I heard it the first night, and I have been listening to it ever since, and I am not afraid of it, and I am done being polite about pretending to be. You do not know what is up there, I said. I know exactly what is up there, he said. So do you. That is why you are so frightened. He took his arm out of my hand, kindly, and he walked into the trees, and the singing rose up to meet him like a crowd rising to greet a friend it had not seen in years. I heard a great glad shout go up. I heard laughter. I swear to you, I heard Nathan laugh too, free and easy, the laugh of a young man, and then the trees closed and there was only the drum. I did not sleep again that night. When the sun came up, the singing stopped, and Nathan's blanket was still folded on the stone, and his bedroll was empty, and the 5 who were left looked at me and waited for me to explain it, and I could not. We have to walk, I told them. We have to walk and not stop and not listen, and we have to do it now, in the daylight, while they are quiet. We walked. The trail led us, for a while. It carried us down through the spruce and into the hemlock again, and for 2 hours I let myself hope. And then we came around a bend, and there was the fire ring, blackened and used, and the folded blanket on the stone, and we were back where we had started, and the sun was already going down. I have read the reports that get filed when people go missing in these mountains. I have written some of them. They are full of careful words. Probable disorientation, likely exposure, search suspended due to terrain. The reports never say what I am about to say, because the reports are written by people who were not there. And a report has to be a thing that can be believed. What I am about to say cannot be believed. I am saying it anyway, because it is true, and because there is no one left to say it but me. That second night, after Nathan walked into the trees and did not come back, I learned the hardest thing about the people of these mountains. They are patient. They do not chase. They do not need to. A wolf runs its prey down because a wolf can starve. The travelers have never been hungry a single day in all the long years of the world. They simply wait at the edge of the firelight, generation after generation, and they sing, and they let the cold and the fear and the tiredness do their work, and they know, the way you know the sun will rise, that sooner or later a person will stand up and walk toward the warmth on their own 2 feet. They had been waiting for these 5 since before I was born. They had been waiting for me longer than that. That third night they came for the rest. They did not come as the old woman had come, one figure at the edge of the firelight asking politely to be let in. They came as a crowd. They came out of the trees all at once, soft-footed and smiling, men and women and children, dozens of them, more than could have lived in any village I have ever known. And they were beautiful, and they were warm, and not one of them cast a shadow in the firelight. I want to be honest about what I felt, because if I lie about it, then none of this is worth telling. I was not only afraid. Part of me wanted to go with them. They stood at the edge of our little fire, glad and patient and shining, and they did not threaten us. They did not reach for us. They only opened their arms and they sang, and the song was every warm thing I had ever lost. It was my grandmother's kitchen. It was being small and safe and certain that nothing bad would ever come. They offered all of it, and all we had to do was say yes. Heather went first, and that surprised me, because Heather was the planner, the one who measured everything. But I think that was why. She had spent 2 days watching her numbers turn into lies, watching the map and the watch and the careful schedule come apart in her hands, and these people offered her a place where nothing needed to be measured because nothing ever changed. She closed her notebook. She set it down on the stone, very neatly, the way Nathan had folded his blanket. And she walked into their arms and they folded her in among them and she was gone. Douglas tried to fight. Of course he did. He was a hunter and a strong man, and he had spent his whole life being the one who was not afraid. He shouted at them. He told the rest of us to get behind him. He picked up a burning branch from the fire and he swung it at the nearest of them, a tall young man with a kind face, and the branch passed through that young man like a hand passing through smoke. And the young man kept smiling, and he said Douglas's name, softly, with such love in it, and Douglas stopped. I saw the moment it happened. I saw the fight go out of him, not because he was beaten, but because he was tired. Because being the strong one is a heavy thing to carry for 54 years, and here was a place that would carry it for him. He dropped the branch. He let out a breath that seemed to empty him entirely. And he walked into the crowd with his shoulders down, like a man finally setting down a pack he has carried up a mountain. And they took his weight, and he was gone. Alice did not have to be persuaded at all. She had heard them clearest from the start. She who could not hear me speak at arm's length had heard their singing from miles away, and I think she had been a little in love with it since the first night. She smiled at me, the same knowing smile she had given me at the trailhead, as if she had understood from the beginning how this would end and had only been waiting kindly for the rest of us to catch up. She squeezed my hand. She told me I was a good boy and I should stop worrying so much. And she walked into the warm crowd of them as if she were finally going home, and they made a place for her, and she was gone. That left Beverly. Beverly Stevens, 60 years old, calm and watchful, who had matched her pace to Alice all the way up the mountain without being asked. She stood beside me at the dying fire, and she did not move toward them, and they did not pull her, because they never pull, they only ask. And they were asking her now, the whole shining crowd of them, with their open arms and their endless glad singing, and I could see her wanting it. I could see 2 days of cold and fear and impossible trails weighing on her, and I could see how heavy the world is, how heavy it is just to be a person who has to keep being a person, and I could see how light they were offering to make her. She turned to me. Her eyes were wet. "Why are you not going?" she asked me. "You hear it too. I can see that you hear it. It is the most beautiful thing in the world. Why are you the only one who will not go?" And there it was. There was the whole of it. There was my grandmother's hand on my chin, and her voice, and the words she put in me before I was old enough to know they were a wall she was building around my life. "The travelers never take a soul," I said. "They only ask. And the most dangerous word you will ever own is yes." Beverly looked at me for a long moment, and then she did a thing I did not expect, a thing I have turned over in my mind every night since. She smiled at me, and it was not a cruel smile. It was a sad and gentle and pitying smile. The kind of smile you give a man who has gotten something wrong and will never know it. "That is not wisdom," she said softly. "That is a cage, and the woman who gave it to you knew it was a cage. That is why she said it was a pity you learned it so well. She did not want to save you, child. She wanted to keep you out. And Beverly Stevens turned away from me, and she walked into the light and the warmth and the singing, and the crowd of them closed around her, and the last thing I saw was her face. No longer afraid, no longer tired, no longer carrying anything at all. Then the singing rose to a great glad height, and the drums beat all together, and the whole crowd of them turned as one and walked back up the slope toward the trees that grow in rows, and the gloom took them, and the song grew fainter and fainter, until it was only the heartbeat of a single far-off drum, and then it was nothing, and I was alone at a dead fire on a mountain that does not appear on any map I have ever signed. In the morning the trail let me go. It is a simple thing to say and a terrible thing to know. The path that had lied to us for 3 days straightened itself out and carried me down and out, easy as breathing, in a single afternoon, as if it had only ever been waiting for me to be the last one left. I walked out at the Sugarlands trailhead at dusk, alone, with 5 empty bedrolls in my pack and a notebook that was not mine, and a folded blanket I could not bring myself to leave behind. I told the truth in my report, the part of the truth that could be written. I said the group was lost. I said the terrain was disorienting. I said the search was suspended. The other words, the true words, I keep on the cassette in the evidence drawer. The one no one will play to the end. The one where you can hear, very faint under my voice, a soft and happy singing that does not belong to anyone alive. I am an old man now myself. My knees are going. There is no one waiting for me at home. And on the warm nights of late summer, when the wind comes down out of the high country, I sit on my porch and I hear it, far off and patient and glad, the drum and the singing. And I know that my grandmother is up there, and Nathan and Heather and Douglas and Alice and Beverly are up there, warm and laughing and never cold again, and that all of them are at peace. And I sit on my porch in the cold and the gloom, alone, holding fast to the know that my grandmother built around my whole life, and I no longer know whether she gave it to me to save me or only to keep me out. The travelers never take a soul. They only ask. I am still saying no. I do not know anymore why. The wedge is still in my truck. It is a piece of iron about the length of my forearm, rusted the color of dried blood, and I have not been able to throw it away in 11 years. People who ride with me sometimes pick it up off the floor mat and ask what it is for. I tell them it is for splitting firewood. That is a lie. I have used that wedge to split exactly one thing in my life, and it was not wood, and it did not bleed. I have been a backcountry ranger in the southern Appalachians for most of my adult life. I know the names of these ridges the way other people know the rooms of their own houses. I know which creeks run year-round and which ones go quiet by August. I know where the bear's den and where the laurel grows so thick that a grown person can stand 4 feet from you and not be seen. I tell you this so that you understand I am not a man who frightens easily, and I am not a man who tells stories. For 11 years I have told no one what I am about to tell you, because the people who would have believed me are mostly gone, and the people who are left would have thought the gorge finally took my mind instead of my friends. The place is called Greystone Gorge. You will not find it on most maps because the maps mark it as part of a larger wilderness area. A long fold of granite and shadow that drops away from the ridge road and runs north for 9 miles before it opens into the river valley. The walls of it are pale stone, gray in good light and almost white at dawn, and they lean in close enough at the bottom that the sky becomes a thin blue ribbon overhead. It is beautiful. I want that on the record because of everything I am going to say. The worst part is that it is still one of the most beautiful places I have ever walked. The mountain did not feel like a trap. It felt like a cathedral. That was the lie it told. In the summer of that year, 6 people came up the ridge road to walk into the gorge, and I was the 7th, and I am the only one who has ever spoken of it. They were a group of friends and family, the kind that has been taking one big trip together every summer for decades. Peter Crawford was the one who organized them. He was 48, broad in the shoulders, the sort of man who counted heads and read the map upside down so the others did not have to. He carried the permits in a plastic sleeve and he shook my hand too hard, the way nervous people do when they are pretending not to be nervous. His partner was Samantha Mason, who was 40, quiet, a nurse by trade, and the only one of them who looked at the gorge mouth and did not smile. There was Carl Morales, 61, a hunter who had brought a rifle he had owned longer than I had been alive. He told me twice that he had killed a black bear with it in 1984, and both times he laughed afterward in a way that did not reach his eyes. There was Nicole Henry, the youngest at 35, sharp and restless, a person who fished the way some people pray, with total attention and no patience for being spoken to. And there were the 2 old ones, the ones who held the group together. Rose Kennedy, 58, who had grown up in a hollow not 20 miles from where we stood, and her older brother, Harold Boyd, who was 75 years old and had eyes the pale gray of the gorge walls, and who took one look at the cleft in the mountain and said something I did not understand until it was far too late. "You can feel where they joined it," Harold said. He was not talking to me. He was talking to the rock. "Everything made of stone has a seam where it was joined. Find the seam and even a mountain comes apart." I thought he was an old man, being poetic. I gave him a polite nod and went back to checking their gear. I want to be honest with you about why I went in with them at all. It was not protocol. Their permit was in order and they did not need a ranger escort. But there had been reports that summer that I had not put in any official log because I had not known what to write. Hikers coming out of the north end of the gorge with stories that did not match. A father and son who swore they had heard a sound like a quarry working at night. The slow grind and knock of stone on stone, miles from any road. A woman who had found her tent flattened in the morning, not torn, not clawed, but pressed down into the dirt as if something very heavy had simply leaned on it while she slept and then thought better of the meal. And there were the cairns. You know what a cairn is? A stack of stones built by hikers to mark a trail. The gorge had always had a few. That summer there were dozens of new ones, and they were wrong. They were too tall, balanced in ways that should not have held, and they were not on the trail. They were off in the laurel, in places no hiker would bother to mark, arranged in long lines that curved away into the gloom, like the vertebrae of something buried. I had walked out to one of them in June. When I got close, I saw that the stones were not stacked. They were stuck together, fused, the way two ice cubes fuse in a glass, with no mortar and no seam, as if the rock had been warm once and had cooled around itself. I stood by that fused cairn for a long time in the June light. I put my bare hand on it, which I have wished 1,000 times I had not done, because the stone was cold, the way nothing in a July wood should be cold, a deep aching cold that pulled the warmth out through my palm and up my arm before I snatched it back. And there was a smell, not rot, cleaner than rot, and worse. The smell of a quarry in winter, of wet stone and cut earth and something underneath it, faint and animal, like the den of a thing that eats. I remember a single bird had been calling somewhere up the slope the whole walk in, and that when I stood at the cairn it stopped, and the gorge went quiet, and I had the sudden and complete certainty that I was being measured, that something had taken my size and my warmth and the speed of my breathing and had filed it away for later. I left faster than I am proud of. I did not look back, because some part of me already knew that if I looked back I would see one of the pale shapes in the laurel turn its head. I told myself it was a mineral thing, some quirk of the stone. I am telling you now that I did not believe that even then. So I went in with the 6 of them, and I told Peter it was to check trail conditions, and the truth was that I did not want 6 good people walking 9 miles into that gorge alone. The first day was easy and bright and full of laughter, and I have gone over it 1,000 times looking for the moment I could have turned us around. We made camp the first night at a wide bend in the creek where the water ran clear over pale gravel. Nicole caught 4 trout before the rest of us had the tents up, and Rose fried them in butter over the fire, and Harold told a story about their grandfather running a still in a hollow that the lake had since swallowed. Carl cleaned his rifle and said the gorge was the kind of place where a man could disappear and be glad of it. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. I watched them around that fire, and I let myself believe, for a few hours, that I had walked in with them for no reason at all. Samantha sat a little apart, the way nurses do, watching the rest of us the way she would watch a ward, counting us without seeming to. Rose and Nicole argued in a friendly way about whether the trout had been better dry rubbed or floured, and Peter pored over the map by headlamp, tracing the next day's miles with a finger, planning, always planning. Only Harold did not settle. He sat facing out, away from the warmth, with his back to all of us, and his pale eyes on the north end of the gorge where the walls leaned closest together. And once, when he thought no one was looking, I saw him press 2 fingers to the ground beside him and hold them there, the way a man holds his hand to a door to feel if there is a fire on the other side. "What is it?" I asked him quietly. "The ground is wrong," he said. "Feel it." I put my hand down where his had been. The stone under the thin soil was cold. Not cool, cold, the deep settled cold of a thing that the summer had never reached. "It should warm in the day and give it back at night," Harold said. "This gives back nothing. This takes." He stood, slow, his knees popping. "Sleep close to the fire," he said. and went to his tent and did not say anything else. It got cold that night. That was the first thing that was wrong, though I did not let myself name it. It was the middle of July and we were not high enough for it, and the cold did not come down off the ridge the way mountain cold does, slow and even. It came up out of the gorge. I lay in my tent and felt it rise off the stone underneath me, a deep ground chill like the breath of a cellar. And I heard the creak and the wind in the laurel, and then I heard, very far off and very low, a sound like one boulder being set down on top of another. I told myself it was a rockfall. The gorge shed stone all the time. In the morning, Harold was already up, sitting on a flat rock at the edge of camp with his pale eyes fixed on the north end of the gorge where the walls leaned closest together. Rose brought him coffee. I heard her ask if he had slept. I heard him answer, and I have never forgotten it, because of what came later. It walked in the night, Harold said. Our grandmother had a name for it. She said, "You do not speak the name at the front of the mouth, you say it back here." And he touched his throat, low, where the breath starts. He did not make the sound for us. I am almost glad. Peter laughed it off and clapped the old man on the shoulder and said the cold had everyone spooked, and we should make miles while the day was good. We broke camp. We walked north, deeper, into the part of the gorge where the trail thinned and the cairns began. By noon we had passed 11 of the fused cairns, and Nicole had stopped fishing, and Samantha had stopped speaking, and the only sound any of us wanted to make was the sound of our own boots, because the gorge had gone quiet in a way that a living place is never quiet. No birds, no insects, just the creek, talking to itself, and that pale stone leaning in over us, and the feeling growing in all of us at once that we were not the only thing in the gorge that was awake. We came around a bend at the base of a high gray wall, and there in the soft mud at the edge of the creek was a footprint. It was longer than my arm. It had pressed down into the mud 6 inches at the heel, and it was not the print of a foot. It was the print of a thing that walked on something flat and broad and cracked across the surface like a slab of split shale, and around its edge, where the mud had been forced up by the weight, the rim had baked hard and pale, as if whatever made it had carried, in the sole of its foot, a deep and patient cold. Carl crouched over it with his rifle across his knees. For a long moment nobody said anything. Then Harold's voice came from behind us, low and back in his throat, almost gentle. "There it is," he said. "It knows we are here now." We did not turn around. I want to say that we did, that good sense and that footprint were enough, but they were not. Peter spread the map on a rock and showed us that we were closer to the north end of the gorge than to the south, that the river valley and the easy walk out lay only 4 miles ahead, that going back meant 5 miles down the throat of the thing that had made that print. It was the kind of reasoning that is correct on paper and wrong in the body. Every animal part of me wanted to go back the way we knew, but the map said forward, and Peter was a man who trusted maps, and we followed him, because that is what frightened people do. They follow the one who sounds the most certain. Harold did not argue. He only walked at the back now, beside Rose, and the two of them spoke to each other in low voices, and I caught pieces of it. He was telling her things, old things. I heard him say that their grandmother had warned them off the high gorge as children, that she had called it a hungry place, that she had said the cold thing in it had worn the mountain so long that the mountain had forgotten which parts were itself and which parts were the thing. I heard Rose say, "She was a superstitious old woman, Harold." And I heard Harold answer, "She was right about the snake bite, and she was right about the well, and she was right about the year the frost came in June. She was right about everything except how long it would wait." That was the layer underneath the words. On top, 2 old people arguing about a dead grandmother. Underneath, an old man telling his sister as kindly as he could that he did not think all of them were going to walk out. I am going to stop here for one breath, because I have never told this part out loud and I need you with me for it. If you are listening to this and you have not yet pressed the like button on this video, I am asking you to do that now, while there is still daylight left in the story, because there is not much of it left after this, and I would rather not say the next part to an empty room than stay with me. Stay close. We lost Carl first. It was late afternoon. The light in the gorge had gone the flat gray of a coming storm, though there were no clouds, and the cold was rising off the stone in waves now, so that we could see our own breath in the middle of July. We had stopped to fill water at a place where the creek pooled deep and still. Carl had gone a little way up the slope to the base of the wall, because he had seen something, a pale shape set back against the gray rock, and being a hunter he wanted to know what it was. I went after him. I do not know why I, of all of us, went after him. I have asked myself that for 11 years. When I came up the slope, I saw what he had seen. Set into the base of the wall, where the stone had cracked and a hollow had opened, was a cairn taller than I was, and it was not made of stones, it was made of people. Not bodies, not anything so simple as that. It was made of the shapes of people, gray and seamless, men and women, and at least one that had been smaller than the rest. All of them pressed and fused into a single column of pale stone, their faces still there in the rock, their mouths still open. I understood then, all at once, what the cold did. I understood why the tent had been pressed flat and not torn. The thing in the gorge did not tear, it held. It held you against itself until the cold in it crept into you and slowed you and stilled you and made you, very gently and very patiently, into more of itself. Carl was standing in front of the column with his rifle hanging from one hand, just looking up at the faces. And behind him, where there had been a pale shape against the gray wall, the wall stood up. I have tried for 11 years to describe how a piece of a cliff stands up and walks, and I cannot do it in a way that will make you believe me, so I will only tell you what I saw. It was twice the height of a tall man. It was the color of the gorge walls, and it was made of the same stone, slabs and plates of it overlapping like the hide of some terrible fish, and where the plates met there were seams, thin gray lines, and through those seams, when it moved, came the deep cold like breath through teeth. It had no face that I could bear to look at. It had a shape where a face should be, a broad cracked plane with two deeper hollows, and it turned that plane down toward Carl Morales the way you or I would lower our eyes to look at something small near our feet. Carl did the only thing a hunter knows to do. He raised the rifle he had carried for 50 years and he fired into it. I saw the bullet strike. I saw the spark and the chip of stone fly, and I saw the thing not even slow, not even register it, the way you would not register a thrown grain of sand. He fired again and a third time fast, the way a man fires when fear has taken his hands, and on the fourth the thing reached down with a hand made of overlapping plates of gray rock, and it did not strike him and it did not crush him. It closed around him. It pressed him to its chest the way a person presses a cold drink to themselves on a hot day, and Carl Morales screamed, and the scream went on, and then it changed. It did not stop, it slowed. It dropped in pitch, lower and lower, until it was not a scream anymore but a deep grinding moan, and then it was the sound of stone settling, and then it was nothing, and where Carl had been there was a new pale shape against the gray, already going still, already going hard. I do not remember running. I remember being at the bottom of the slope and Samantha catching me and Peter shouting and Harold's voice cutting through all of it, flat and calm and terrible. "Do not run straight," Harold said. "It is faster than you in a straight line. It is the mountain. You cannot outrun a mountain. You go where the mountain cannot follow." "There is nowhere it cannot follow," Peter said, and his voice broke on it, because he had been the one with the map, and the map had no answer for this. "The water," Nicole said. She had not made a sound until then. She was staring back up the slope at the thing as it stepped slowly down toward us, each footfall a soft, heavy thud that we felt through the soles of our boots. It came out of the dry rock. Look at it. It cracks where it bends. It is dry. Maybe it does not like the water. It was a guess. It was a fishing guide's guess made out of nothing but the way the thing moved and a desperate need for it to be true. And it was the second thing that saved my life, though I did not know it yet. And the first had been an old man saying a sentence about seams that I had not understood. We went down into the creek. We waded into the deep still pool where Carl had filled his bottle a lifetime ago. And we stood in the cold water up to our chests, all 6 of us. And the thing came down the slope and stopped at the edge of the water. It stood over us. It lowered that broad cracked plane of a face down toward the surface, and the cold came off it so hard that a skin of ice formed on the pool around us in the middle of July, thin plates of it knitting together from the banks inward, and we understood that Nicole had been half right and half terribly wrong. It did not like the moving water, but it could freeze the still. "Up the creek," Harold said, "where it runs fast, where it cannot still it. Go now." We went up the creek, against the current, slipping on the gravel, and behind us the thing followed along the bank, never entering the running water, pacing us, patient, in no hurry at all, because it was the mountain, and the mountain has all the time there is, and it knew, the way the gorge had known from the moment we walked into its mouth, that the creek would not run fast forever. That somewhere ahead the gorge would narrow and the water would pool and go still, and it would be waiting on the bank when we got there. It is a strange thing, to be hunted by something that does not run. I had thought, before that night, that the worst part of being prey would be the speed of it, the sudden rush. It is not. The worst part is the patience. We fought up that creek for an hour with our legs going numb in the cold water and our packs dragging at us, and not once did the thing on the bank hurry, and not once did it fall behind. It walked at the pace of an old person crossing a room. It did not need to do more. It had done this before, in this gorge, more times than there are names for the years, and it knew that warm, soft things tire, and that the water always pools in the end, and that fear does half its work for it. Twice Rose stumbled and went under, and Samantha hauled her up, and the thing on the bank turned its broad, cracked face to watch, and waited, and let us recover, the way a man waits for a fish to tire on the line because there is no sport in landing it too soon. Peter stopped trusting the map somewhere in that hour. I saw it happen. I saw the moment the certainty went out of him, when he looked at the paper and then at the leaning walls and understood that the lines on the page did not describe the place we were in, that maps are made by people who walked out, and that he no longer knew if he would be one of them. After that he stopped leading. We all started looking at Harold. It was full gloom by the time we reached the Narrows. The creek slowed. The pool spread out ahead of us, flat and black and silent, and on the far bank already, before we had even seen it move, the pale shape of it stood up out of the stone and waited, and Harold Boyd, 75 years old, waded out of the water onto the bank toward it. Harold, Rose said. Just his name. She said it the way you say a name when saying it is the only thing left you can do. He did not turn around. He had the look of a man who had decided something a long time ago and had only been waiting for the moment to come due. He still had his walking staff in one hand, a length of old hardwood worn smooth, and he held it the way you hold a thing you mean to use. Listen to me, he said, and he was talking to me now, to all of us. But his pale gray eyes found mine in the gloom and held them, and I have never been able to decide whether he chose me because he trusted me or because he knew I was the one most likely to live to do the thing. It is stone. You heard the bullets. You cannot break stone by hitting the flat of it, but it is joined. Everything made of stone has a seam where it was joined. Find the seam and even a mountain comes apart. There it was, the same words he had said at the mouth of the gorge 2 days before when I had thought he was only an old man being poetic. The same words exactly. And this time I understood them, because I had seen the seams when it moved, the thin gray lines where the plates met, the places the cold breathed through. The flat of it was armor. The seams were where it was only just barely itself. You have iron, Harold said. Iron in your pack. The wedge. I did. I had forgotten it entirely. It was a splitting wedge, an old one. A piece of forged iron the length of my forearm that I carried for clearing deadfall off the trail. And it had been in the bottom of my pack since the trailhead, dead weight, the kind of thing you stop noticing you carry. I had it out before I had decided to. You do not swing iron at stone, Harold said. You set it in the seam and you drive it home. You let the wedge find the grain does the work. You only have to be brave enough to get close. He paused. The thing on the bank had begun to move toward him, slow, sure, in no hurry. And someone has to make it hold still. I understood what he meant to do, and I opened my mouth to say no. And Rose was already screaming it, and Harold Boyd walked up the bank into the cold with his staff raised, and he did the bravest and the most foolish thing I have ever seen a human being do. He went straight at it. He did not run straight from it, the way he had told us not to. He ran straight at it, where it did not expect a small warm thing to come, and he drove the end of his hardwood staff up into one of the seams at its knee, into the cold gap where two plates met, and he leaned on it with the whole of his 75 years. The thing stopped. Not because the staff could hurt it, because the staff was set in its seam, in the joint, and a joint with a wedge in it cannot fully close, and for one breath it could not take the step it wanted to take. It looked down at the old man the way it had looked down at Carl, and in that one breath, while it was still, I ran up the bank with the iron wedge in my hand, and I did the only thing I have ever done that I am not ashamed of and not proud of either. The one thing that is simply the truest thing I have ever done. I set the iron in the seam at the base of its spine, low, where the great plates of its back met the plates of its hips, where the cold breathed hardest, and I drove the wedge home with the heel of my hand, and then with a rock, and then with both fists, screaming, while the cold came off it so hard that the skin split on my knuckles and the blood froze before it fell. I let the wedge find the grain. I drove it in, and in, and in, and the mountain came apart. It did not shatter all at once. It was worse than that, and slower. A crack ran up from the seam where the iron sat, a thin gray line racing up its back, and then another branched off, and another, the way ice breaks across a pond, and through every new crack the cold poured out of it in a long sighing rush like a cellar door opening. And the thing made a sound I will hear until I die. A deep grinding groan that was the sound Carl had made at the end, the sound of stone settling, the sound of something enormous and patient and old finally letting go of the shape it had held for longer than there have been people in these mountains. It folded. It came down in slabs and plates, and the plates were just stone now, gray and ordinary and cold, and they fell on the old man who had set his staff in its knee, and they buried Harold Boyd on the bank of the creek under the ruin of the thing he had named with the back of his throat. We dug for him until our hands would not work. We did not find him. We found his staff, snapped, and we found, under a slab too large for the four of us to lift, the shape of him already going pale and seamless and still, his face still there in the stone, his mouth still open, and we understood that the cold had reached him before the weight had, that the gorge had kept him after all, and that there was nothing left to carry out. Rose Kennedy did not speak again for the rest of the walkout. Samantha held her up. Peter went ahead in silence with the broken map. Nicole walked beside me, and at the mouth of the gorge where the walls fall away and the river valley opens green and ordinary in the morning light, she stopped and looked back and said, "It is not the only one, is it?" It was not a question. I did not answer it. I have never answered it. 4 of us walked out of Greystone Gorge. 5 had walked out if you count what we carried in our heads, which was the rest of our lives. The official report says that Carl Morales and Harold Boyd died in a rock fall in a remote section of the wilderness area, that their bodies could not be recovered, and that the gorge has been closed to the public ever since. I wrote that report. Every word of it is a lie, and every word of it is also true, because there was a rock fall in the end. I made it myself, with an iron wedge and an old man's last breath. I kept the wedge. I told you that. It is still in my truck, rusted the color of dried blood, and I have not been able to throw it away, and now I will tell you the part I have told no one, the part that is the real reason I have stayed quiet for 11 years. The seam. For 11 years I have been finding the seam in myself. It started in my knuckles, where the cold split the skin that night, a place that never fully warmed again. A patch of 2 fingers that has been cold every day since, in summer, in front of the fire, in my own bed, and the cold has been moving, slowly, the way the gorge does everything, with all the time there is, up the back of my hand now, into the wrist, and some mornings I wake and my breath fogs in a warm room, and I lie very still, and I think about what Harold said at the mouth of the gorge, the words I drove an iron wedge home on, the words that saved what was left of us. Everything made of stone has a seam where it was joined. Find the seam and even a mountain comes apart. I used to think those words were a weapon. I have started to understand they were a warning, and that the gorge was listening when he said them, the way it listens to everything, patient, in no hurry at all. Because the thing about a seam is that it works both ways. It is where a thing comes apart. It is also where the cold gets in. I have started to wonder where mine is, and some nights, very far off and very low, under the wind and the creak of whatever campground I am parked above, I hear it, one boulder, set down on top of another. Closer, I think, than it was the year before. If you walk into the high gorges of these mountains, and the birds go quiet, and the cold comes up out of the stone in the middle of summer, do not look for the trail. Do not trust the one who sounds the most certain. Find the running water, and stay in it, and do not stop until you are out. And if you ever find an iron wedge in the bottom of an old ranger's pack, rusted the color of dried blood, leave it where it is. He is going to need it. There is a sound a human throat makes only once. I heard it twice that summer, from 2 different people, and both times it came out of the same wall of laurel where nothing the size of a person should have been able to stand. I have worn this uniform for 14 years. I have pulled hikers out of flooded creeks and carried a man down a ridge on my own back with his leg folded the wrong way. None of it taught me to be afraid the way that one stretch of green taught me. My name is Sean Warren, and for 9 days I was the only thing standing between 5 strangers and a thing the old-timers up here will not name above a whisper. If you have ever wondered whether the woods can decide they do not want you, stay with me. By the end, you will not need to wonder. I was 37 years old and certain I had already met every kind of trouble these mountains kept. The permit came through my office on a Tuesday, the way they always did, a single sheet of paper that told me almost nothing about the people I would spend the next week trying to keep alive. 6 names. A backcountry loop through the high gaps of the southern Appalachians, the kind of route that looks gentle on a map and turns mean the moment the trail leaves the ground anyone has bothered to maintain. I drove out to meet them at the trailhead while the morning fog was still lying in the hollows like spilled milk. They were waiting by the kiosk when I pulled in. You learn to read a group in the first 30 seconds, before anyone has said a word, and this one read like a family that had been assembled by a stranger. Judy Dixon was the one who walked up to shake my hand first. 64, gray hair pinned back hard, the kind of woman who had clearly outlasted things she did not talk about. Her grip was dry and sure. She told me she had been hiking these ranges since before I was born, and then she said something I did not understand until much later. She said she had come up here to stop hearing her house be empty. I nodded like that was an ordinary thing to say. Out here, people tell you the truth too early, because the trees do not repeat it. Behind her stood Philip Ramos, 73, leaning on a carved walking stick that was older than I was. He did not offer his hand. He just looked at me with eyes the color of creek stones and asked which way we were headed. When I told him the loop, the North Fork first, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said the mountain had a rule, and he wanted all of us to hear it before our boots touched the dirt. I want you to hear it too, because it is the only reason I am still here to tell you any of this. He said, out here fear has a shape, and running is how you show it your shape. If it ever comes for you, you do not run. You plant your feet and you become a stone. Stones do not get chased. Victor Holmes laughed. 57, broad in the shoulders, a man who had clearly spent a career being the loudest person in every room and had never once been corrected for it. He said he had hiked half the country and the only thing that ever chased him was a horsefly. He clapped Philip on the back hard enough to move the old man a half step. Philip did not smile. He just looked at Victor the way you look at someone whose name you expect to forget on purpose. The last two hung back. Megan Black, 32, had a heavy camera slung across her chest and the watchful stillness of a person who would rather record a moment than live in it. She was up here, she told me, for a project. She did not say what kind. And Irene Stone, 50, stood a little apart from everyone, arms folded, looking up at the ridgeline as though she had heard it call her name and was waiting for it to do it again. She barely spoke that whole first morning. I noticed she kept counting us under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. As if she did not trust the number to hold. I gave them the talk I give everyone. Stay together. Filter your water. The weather up high turns in minutes, not hours. I told them my radio reached the ranger station on the hour, and only on the hour, because the granite up here eats the signal the rest of the time. And then, because Philip had set the tone, I told them the practical version of his rule. If you get separated, you do not crash through the brush trying to find us. You stop. You stay put. You make noise where you stand. People who keep moving in a panic are the ones we find days later, 3 ridges from where they should be. I did not believe in his version of it. The stone, the shape, the thing that chases. I believed in the practical version. There is a difference, and that summer taught me the difference was thinner than I ever wanted to know. We started up the North Fork a little after 8. The first few miles were easy, a wide old logging road grown soft with moss, sunlight coming down through the canopy in long gold bars. Judy and Philip walked at the front and traded stories about ranges they had both crossed decades apart. Megan drifted from side to side photographing mushrooms and the way the light fell. Victor talked. Irene counted. It felt for a while like the easiest job I had drawn all season. The first wrong thing was the silence. If you have spent real time in deep woods, you know they are never quiet. There is always something. Birdsong, the scold of a squirrel, the steady working of insects in the leaf litter. Around mid-afternoon, climbing out of a creek bottom into a stand of old hemlock, all of it stopped. Not faded. Stopped. The way a room goes quiet when a stranger opens the door. I felt it on my skin before my mind caught up to it. I held up a hand and the group bunched behind me, and for a long moment the 6 of us stood in a forest that had forgotten how to make a sound. Then I smelled it, wet copper, like a handful of old pennies with something rotten threaded underneath. It came on a breeze that should not have carried it, because the wind was at our backs pushing away from us, and the smell came up the trail toward us anyway, against the grain of the air. I have thought about that more than anything else. The smell came the wrong way. Philip had stopped too. He was not looking around the way the others were. He was looking at the ground. When I came up beside him, I saw what had caught his eye, and the back of my neck went cold in the warm afternoon. There was a deer in the laurel just off the trail. Or there had been a deer. It had been opened from throat to belly and emptied with a care that no bear and no cat I had ever tracked could manage. The hide was peeled back and folded, the way you would fold a blanket, and laid neatly to one side. Nothing in these woods folds its food. The flies had not found it yet. Whatever had done this had done it within the hour. Victor said it was a poacher. He said it loud, because saying it loud made it true for him. Megan was already lifting her camera and I told her to put it down, and I do not know why I said it, except that some animal part of me did not want a picture of that taken, did not want to give it a face that could look back out of a screen later. She lowered the camera slowly. She had taken at least one frame already. I saw the little light. I did not think about it again until it mattered. I am going to ask you something here, while we stand at the edge of that laurel, because in a minute we are going to walk away from it, and the easy part of this story will be over. You have been with me through the trailhead and the climb and the silence, and you have not yet pressed that like button down at the bottom of your screen. It costs you nothing, and it keeps stories like this one finding their way to people in the night. So go ahead and press it now, before we go any deeper, because I promise you the deeper we go, the less you are going to want to take your hands off the light. Philip would not let it go. He crouched by the folded deer for a long time, and when he stood his knees cracked and he looked older than he had at the trailhead, he told me, quietly, just to me, that he had grown up 2 valleys east of here, that his grandfather had a word for the thing that folds its quills and walks against the wind. He would not say the word at first. I asked him to, and he shook his head and said names are how you call something, and he had spent 73 years carefully not calling it. We made camp early that night, in a flat saddle between 2 peaks where I could see in every direction. I told myself it was because the group was tired. The truth is I wanted open ground. I wanted to see anything before it reached us. We built the fire bigger than we needed. Victor told a story about a fishing trip and laughed at his own punchline, and the laugh sounded thin up there, like the mountain was deciding whether to let it echo. Judy sat close to the flames with her knees drawn up and told me, low, that her husband had died in March, and that the house had a particular quiet to it now that she could not be inside without hearing. She had come up here, she said, because at least the mountain quiet was the kind that had something living in it. I did not have the heart to tell her that the quiet we had walked through that afternoon was not that kind at all. I asked Philip, while the others settled, how a man came to know a rule like the one he had given us at the trailhead. He was quiet for a while, feeding small sticks into the fire one at a time, and then he told me about his brother. They had been boys, 8 and 10, sent up to bring the goats down before a storm, and they had heard a calf bawling in a thicket where their family kept no calves. His brother went toward the sound. Philip, younger, slower, frightened, did not. He planted his feet at the edge of the thicket because his legs would not carry him any closer. And that frozen cowardice, he said, was the only reason he came down off that mountain and his brother did not. He had spent 65 years turning his shame into a rule so that the rule could save someone else. I understood then that the old man was not superstitious. He was a survivor, and survivors carry their lessons in the only shape that does not break them. Irene did not sleep. I know because I did not sleep either, and every time I lifted my head from my pack I saw her sitting upright at the edge of the firelight, facing the tree line, counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, her lips moving, counting us against the night, over and over, as if she already knew that before this was over the number was going to start coming up wrong. Once, when she thought no one was watching, she stopped counting people and started counting something else out past the fire, something only she could see, and her count went past 6, 7, 8, 9, and then she shut her eyes hard and went back to counting us, only us, the safe number, the number that was already a lie. Sometime after the fire had burned down to a low red eye, the crying started. It came from the slope below us, far off, then not so far. It was the sound of a woman weeping, broken and exhausted, the way a person sounds at the very end of a long grief. Judy was on her feet before I could stop her, because the sound had reached into the exact wound she had carried up the mountain and pulled. She took 2 steps toward the dark slope and called out, asking if someone was hurt, asking if someone needed help. Philip caught her arm. His grip on her was the only thing that kept her at the fire, and he said the word at last. He put his mouth close to her ear, and he said it so quietly I almost missed it under the crying, and the saying of it took something out of him. He said, "That is not a woman. That is the catawampus, and it has learned what you sound like when you cry, and now it is crying it back to bring you down the hill." Nobody slept the rest of that night. The crying went on for almost an hour and then stopped between one breath and the next, the way a faucet stops, and the not hearing it was worse than the hearing. Judy sat the longest. She kept her eyes on the slope where the sound had come from, and I watched her hands open and close on the blanket across her knees, and I understood that something cruel had happened to her in the night. The thing on the hill had found the most tender part of a grieving woman and worn it like a coat. By morning she did not look frightened. She looked emptied, the way that deer had been emptied, just on the inside where it did not show. I made the decision at first light to cut the trip short. I told the group we would turn the loop into an out and back, that we would walk down the way we had come and have them off the mountain by the following evening. Victor argued. Of course he did. He said one animal crying in the night was no reason to ruin a week he had paid for. He said the word Philip had used like it was a joke, the catawampus, drawing it out, mocking the shape of it in his mouth. Philip looked at him and said only that the thing did not like to be named by people who did not believe in it, and that Victor had now done that twice, and Philip would walk at the back of the line so as not to be standing near him. That should have been the moment I understood how serious the old man was. A man does not rearrange where he walks over a superstition. He does it the way you move away from someone who has lit a cigarette next to a gas can. We broke camp and started down. The morning was clear and the descent was easy, and for 2 hours I let myself believe we had simply spent a bad night in good country, the way you do, the mind smoothing the night over the way water smooths a stone. Megan walked beside me for a stretch and showed me, almost shyly, the photo she had taken at the deer the day before. I had told her to put the camera down. She had not quite listened. I looked at the little screen in the green shade under the trees, and the cold came back into me all at once. The folded deer was in the frame, the trail, the wall of laurel behind it, and in the laurel, low and to the right, where I had seen nothing and smelled only copper, 2 pale circles hung in the leaves at the height of a tall man crouching, eyes catching the flash and throwing it back flat and white, the way an animal does, except they were set too wide and too high, and there was a suggestion around them, in the blur, of a long, lean shape pressed into the green, patient, watching all 6 of us stand there and decide it was a poacher. It had been an arm's reach from Megan when she took the picture. I did not tell her that. I told her to delete it, and she said she could not, that she had tried already that morning and the camera would not let her, that every other photo deleted fine but that one threw an error every time. I have no explanation for that. I am only telling you what she told me, with her voice gone small, in the daylight, with the thing presumably miles behind us. We did not know yet that it was not miles behind us. We did not know it had never once stopped matching our pace. We lost Victor a little after noon. It was nothing dramatic. That is the part that haunts me. He stepped off the trail to relieve himself, told us to go on slow and he would catch up, the way people do 100 times a day in the backcountry. We went on slow. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I stopped the group and called his name back up the trail and got nothing. I told them to stay put, all of them, to plant their feet right there on the open trail and not move for any reason, and I went back for him alone. I found his pack first, sitting upright and neat in the middle of the trail, both shoulder straps laid out flat to the sides, folded, set down with that same terrible care. There was no sign of a struggle around it, no dragged earth, no blood, nothing torn. Just the pack, placed there like an offering, or like a lesson. And from somewhere up the slope, off in the laurel, I heard Victor laugh. His laugh. The thin one from the fire the night before, the punchline laugh. It came again, from a slightly different place, and then a third time from a third place, and each time it was perfect, and each time it was wrong, because Victor was not laughing. Victor was not anywhere a man could laugh from. I want to tell you I went up that slope after him. I did not. I stood on the trail with my heart going like a fist on a door, and I remembered, against every instinct I had, the old man's rule. I planted my feet. I made myself a stone. And the laughing circled me 3 times, 4, each pass a little closer, testing whether the stone would break and run. I did not run. After the longest 2 minutes of my life, the laughing stopped, and the woods made an ordinary sound, a single bird, somewhere, as if a held breath had been let out. I picked up Victor's folded pack and I walked back down to the others on legs that did not feel like mine. I told them Victor was gone and that we were not going to look for him, and the way I said it stopped even Judy from arguing. Irene had been counting the whole time I was up the slope, I learned later, counting the 5 of us that were left, over and over, and now when she counted she got to 5 and her voice would catch every single time on the place where 6 used to be. We pushed hard the rest of that day. I had stopped pretending. I wanted them off this mountain. But the mountain, I was learning, had opinions about which way was down. We came to the creek crossing we had forded the day before, the one I had marked in my memory by a leaning birch and a flat shelf of rock, and the leaning birch was there and the flat shelf was there and the creek was running the wrong way, uphill. I stood at the bank and watched water climb a slope it had no business climbing, and Philip came and stood beside me and said, without surprise, that the catawampus did not chase you out of its country. It rearranged the country so the leaving never finished. He said his grandfather had a phrase for it. The walk that eats itself. We made camp that second night in a worse place than I wanted. A narrow bench with the slope rising sharp on one side because the light had gone and I would not let them walk in the gloom. Before the last of the day failed, I tried the radio. It was the hour, on the hour, the one window the granite allowed me, and I pressed the call and got the ranger station for 9 seconds before the signal died. 9 seconds. I gave them our position and started to say we had lost a man, and the voice that answered me was not the dispatcher I had spoken to 100 times. It was Victor, clear and close and pleased, saying my name back to me through the handset, saying he was so glad I had finally called, asking me to come down and find him. I dropped the radio in the dirt. When I picked it up, the channel was dead static, the way it always was off the hour, and I understood that the thing had learned the one machine I had trusted to reach the outside, and had crawled inside it, and was waiting there now whenever I needed help the most. I did not tell the others. There are mercies you keep. We built the fire as high as the wood allowed. Nobody told stories. Judy held the rule like a prayer and would not be more than an arm from the flames. Megan sat with her dead camera in her lap, refusing to look at it, refusing to put it away. Philip carved something small from a piece of pale wood with quick old hands and would not show me what it was. And Irene faced the tree line and counted us down to 5 and could not make the number sit still. The crying came again after midnight, and this time it was not a woman. This time it was Victor. His voice, ragged and pleading, coming up from the slope below, calling out that his leg was broken, that he had been calling for hours, asking why we had left him, begging one of us to come down and help him up. It was so exactly him that I felt the group lean toward it as one body, felt the pull of it in my own chest, because it is a hard and unnatural thing to sit at a fire and listen to a man you know beg for his life in the dark and do nothing. Judy started to rise, Megan started to rise, and Philip stood up first, between them and the slope, holding the little carved thing in his fist. And he said the words I had said at the trailhead, said them back to me changed and final. The rule turned all the way around. He said you do not run toward it either. It learned that running shows it your shape. So now it has learned that grief makes you walk. It is not crying to chase you anymore. It is crying to call you. And the only ones it can call are the ones who already want to be reached. He looked at Judy when he said that last part. Judy, who had come up the mountain to stop hearing her empty house, and I saw her understand that the thing on the hill had been listening to her since the trailhead, that it had heard the shape of her grief before it had ever heard her name, and that it had been saving her for last. Dawn did not come when it should have. I had my watch, and the watch said it was past 5, then past 6, then past 7, and the sky over the eastern ridge stayed the deep bruised color of the hour before light, and stayed there, and stayed. Philip said the walk that eats itself eats the morning too sometimes, when it has decided. He said it the way a man tells you the name of a disease he has watched take someone before, with no hope in it, only knowing. I made the only decision I had left. I told them we were not going to wait for a morning that was not coming, and we were not going to follow a creek that ran uphill. I told them we were going to walk in one direction and not stop and not turn for any sound, any voice, any crying, no matter whose, and that if the country tried to bend us back on ourselves, we were going to keep walking straight through the bend until it gave up before we did. Outlasted, I said, because Philip had taught me the word. I did not believe we could. I said it anyway because 5 people were looking at me to be the one who believed it. We did not all make it down. I have made my peace with telling you that plainly because you have come this far with these people and you deserve the truth instead of a comfortable shape of it. We lost Megan in the first hour. She had been walking just ahead of me, the dead camera still around her neck, and the thing called to her with the one sound I think she could not refuse. It called to her with the click of a shutter. A single soft mechanical click, off in the laurel to our left, the sound of a photograph being taken. She turned toward it before any of us could grab her. Just turned, the way a flower turns, the way you turn when something you have spent your life chasing finally calls your name. And she stepped off the line into the green, and the green closed over her without a sound, and the click did not come again. Irene screamed. Irene, who had not raised her voice once in 2 days, screamed and then clapped both hands over her own mouth as though she could pull the sound back in, because we all understood at the same moment that screaming was just another shape, just another thing for it to learn and wear. We did not stop for Megan. God help me, we did not stop. To stop was to give it the next one for free. The bruised half-light held. We walked through a country that kept trying to fold us back. The same leaning birch passing on our right 3 times, the same lightning split oak on our left, the trail biting its own tail again and again, and each time it bent us I made us walk straight through the bend, off trail, through the laurel, until the loop broke and spat us out somewhere new. It was working. I felt it working the way you feel a fever break. We were outlasting it. We passed our own camp from the night before, the ring of stones still warm, the flattened grass where 6 of us had lain, and we walked straight through it without stopping because to recognize a place was to let the country use it against you. We passed Victor's folded pack, sitting upright in the middle of the trail where I had left it, and beside it now sat Megan's camera, neatly placed, both straps laid flat to the sides, folded, set down with that terrible care. Judy made a small sound. I told her not to look at it, and she did not, and we walked through that too. Whatever was leaving them for us to find wanted us to slow, to grieve, to bend toward the dead the way the dead bend toward us, and the only answer the mountain understood was to keep our feet moving in one straight line and refuse it every gift it set down in our path. It made its move on the last stretch, where the slope finally tipped down toward real country, toward the lowland haze where I could see, far off, the cut of a road. It came out of the laurel ahead of us, into the open, the first and only time I ever saw the whole of it. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to forget the shape of it and failing. It stood like a great cat, and it did not stand like any cat. Lean and long, and the gray of wet slate, low to the ground, with limbs that bent in a few too many places, and a face that was almost the face of a mountain lion except that the eyes were set wide and high and forward, like a person's, and there was a knowing in them that no animal has any business carrying. It opened its mouth and it did not roar. It used Judy's voice. It used her dead husband's name in her own voice, soft and loving, the way she must have said it 1,000 times in a kitchen that was empty now, and it held the word out to her across the clearing like a hand. Judy took a step toward it, and here is where the old man's rule saved the rest of us. The rule I want you to carry out of this story, even if you forget everything else. I did not run. I did not lunge for her, which is its own kind of running, the body breaking and bolting toward a thing instead of away. I planted my feet. I became a stone, and I said her name, not loud, not pleading, just steady, the way you say a name to bring someone back across a long distance. I said, Judy, stand still. Stones do not get chased. And I watched her hear me through the worst grief a creature could play back at her, and I watched her feet stop, and I watched her become a stone beside me. The catawampus waited. It is, in the end, a patient thing, and I think it has all the time the mountain has, which is more time than any of us can stand to think about. It waited for one of us to break, to run, to walk, to give it the shape it needed, and we did not give it. 5 became 4, became 3 on the way down, and the 3 of us who were left, Judy and Philip and me, stood in that clearing like 3 stones in a stream and let the patience come up against us and find nothing to hold. After a time I will never be able to measure, it turned, without hurry, the way something leaves a thing it has decided is not worth the chase, and it folded itself back into the laurel, and the bruised light over the eastern ridge finally broke into an ordinary, merciless, beautiful dawn. We walked down to the road. A county truck found us on it, an hour later. 3 filthy, exhausted people who could not give a clean account of the 3 who were not with us. The reports say Victor Holmes, Megan Black, and Irene Stone are missing, presumed lost to terrain, and the search ran 2 weeks and found Victor's folded pack and nothing else, no sign, no remains, nothing for the families to bury. I let the report stand. Who would I tell? What word would I use? Philip Ramos died that winter, in his bed, 2 valleys east of where he was born, an old man who had spent 73 years carefully not calling a thing by its name and broke that rule once to save 5 strangers, 3 of whom he managed to keep alive. I went to the service. Judy was there. We did not say much. There is not much you can say. And here is the part I have never told anyone. The part that is the reason I am telling you any of it at all. Sitting here now with the lights on and the doors locked. The rule saved us. Plant your feet. Become a stone. Stones do not get chased. It is true, and it is the only true thing I learned up there. And it worked, and I am alive because of it. But nobody tells you what a stone is. A stone does not get chased. A stone also does not get away. A stone stays exactly where the mountain put it for as long as the mountain wants, and the mountain is patient, and the mountain has all the time there is. I do not run anymore, not from anything. When a branch cracks against my house at night, I do not startle and I do not flee. I plant my feet in my own kitchen and I become a stone, the way it taught me, the way Philip taught me, and I wait, because I have learned that running shows it your shape. And out past my fence, at the edge of the tree line where my yard gives way to the woods that climb back up toward those ridges. Most nights now, there are two pale circles hanging in the gloom at the height of a tall man crouching, set too wide, set too high, patient. It learned that I do not run. So now it just stands at my line, every night, a stone of its own, and the two of us outlast each other in the dark. And I understand at last what the old man could not make himself say: you do not lose it. You only teach it how to wait. Incident report, the second week of July. 6 experienced hikers entered the South Mountain backcountry on a 5-day permit. One of them walked back out. I am the one who walked out, and the pages that follow are the part of it I could never bring myself to type onto the form. I have carried a small brass bell in my coat pocket for 11 years. It does not ring. The night I came down off that ridge, I packed the clapper full of candle wax and pressed it shut, and I have never cleaned it out. Some evenings I lift the bell to my ear the way a person holds a shell to a child and tells them the ocean is inside. I do not hear an ocean. I hear a forest going quiet. And worse than the quiet, I hear what the quiet was always trying to warn us about. Let me tell it the way it happened, in order, so that you understand none of us were fools. We were careful people. Careful did not matter. I had been a backcountry ranger on that mountain for 19 years when the permit came across my desk. 6 names: Alan Ferguson, 66, Christina Knight, 43, Bruce Gardner, 79, Lauren Payne, 39, Martin Berry, 55, Evelyn Stevens, 62, a walking club out of the valley, the kind that has matching water bottles and a group text and a tradition of one long trip every summer. My supervisor asked me to walk them in and stay with them, not because they needed a babysitter, but because we had logged what we were politely calling bear activity along the eastern hollows. 3 calves taken off a farm at the foot of the mountain, a hunting hound found in 2 pieces a quarter mile from where it had slipped its lead. The farmer kept saying the word bear because bear was a word he could live next to. I had seen the calf carcasses. No bear I ever tracked feeds the way that thing fed. I met them at the trailhead a little after 7 in the morning. The light was still low and green through the oaks, and the air had that wet stone smell the Appalachians carry even in summer. Alan Ferguson shook my hand first, a tall, lean man with a runner's build and a way of looking past you up the trail, already gone, already climbing. Christina Knight was the planner, a laminated map in a chest pocket and a printed elevation chart she had clearly made herself. Martin Berry made a joke about the weight of his pack before I had finished saying hello. And Lauren Payne, the youngest, laughed too loud at it, the way people laugh when they are nervous and trying not to be. Evelyn Stevens was quiet and kind, with reading glasses on a cord and a small brass bell tied to the top strap of her pack. And then there was Bruce Gardner, 79 years old and built like a fence post, born in the hollow below the eastern face, the only one of them who had not driven in. He had walked up from his own land that morning to join the others. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he looked at the tree line. And the first thing he ever said to me was not hello. "You hearing birds this morning, Ranger?" I told him I supposed I was. "Then we are fine," he said, "for now." I should have asked him what he meant. I told myself old men talk in weather and omens, and I let it go. That is the first thing I let go. There would be more. We climbed all morning. The trail switched back up through laurel, so thick it closed over the path like a green tunnel, and the group settled into the easy rhythm of people who had done this together for years. Christina kept a steady count of our miles. Alan ranged ahead and circled back like a dog working a field. Martin and Lauren traded stories. Evelyn walked near the back with Bruce, and her bell made a small bright sound at every step, a clean little note that carried farther than you would think under that canopy. Around noon, Bruce stopped her on the trail. I was close enough to hear. "Take that bell off your pack," he said. He did not say it unkindly, but he did not say it lightly either. "It is for bears," Evelyn told him, smiling. "You make noise, they hear you coming, they leave you be. You taught me that, Bruce. 30 years ago you taught me that." "I taught you that about bears," Bruce said. "There is no bear up here this week." She laughed and patted his arm and kept the bell. He looked at her, and then he looked at the trees, and he did not say anything else. That was the second thing I let go. "I want you to understand these people, because in a little while you are going to watch them die. And a death does not mean anything unless you have first seen the life." Alan Ferguson had retired early from a job that had paid him too well to leave any room for living, and he had spent the years since trying to climb out of the hole that money had dug for him. He counted summits the way other men count regrets. Christina Knight had buried a husband young and had raised 2 children alone and had organized every trip this club had taken for 19 years, down to the ounce, because order was the only prayer she had left that ever seemed to get answered. Martin Barry made jokes the way a man on thin ice keeps talking, not because anything is funny, but because the silence underneath is worse. Lauren Payne was new to the group, brought in by Martin, half their age and twice their energy, and she had spent the morning trying to prove she belonged, which is the most dangerous thing a person can try to do in the backcountry. And Evelyn Stevens, with her reading glasses and her little bell, was the heart of them. The one who remembered birthdays, the one Bruce had taught to walk these woods 3 decades before, back when he still believed teaching her would keep her safe. The afternoon wore long. The saddle leveled, and the laurel gave way to old growth, big oaks and tulip poplars with trunks 2 men could not reach around, and the canopy closed so high above us that walking under it felt like walking at the bottom of a green sea. The light came down in slow coins. The trail was soft underfoot with 100 years of leaf fall. It was beautiful. I have to tell you that, because the part of me that has nightmares forgets it, and it is not fair to the mountain to remember only the worst of it. It was the most beautiful country I ever worked, and I loved it, right up until the moment it stopped loving me back. Bruce kept looking at the trees. Not nervously, carefully, the way a man reads a sky he has known his whole life. Once, in the deep afternoon, he stopped on the trail and held up one hand, and we all stopped behind him, and he stood listening to a forest that sounded exactly the same to me as it had a moment before. After a while, he lowered his hand and walked on. I asked him quietly what he had heard. He said, "Nothing." That is the trouble. For about 10 seconds back there I heard nothing at all. Then he smiled at me, an old man's smile with too much knowing in it, and he said, "It is probably nothing." That was the 3rd thing I let go, and I am no longer counting, because the truth is I spent that whole first day letting go of every warning the mountain handed me, with both hands, gladly, the way you do when you are afraid of what holding on would mean. We made camp that first evening in a flat clearing where an old logging road had heeled over into a meadow, ringed on 3 sides by forest and open on the 4th to a long view down the valley. It was a good camp. I have made worse 100 times. We set 6 tents and dug a small pit, and Martin got a fire going while the light went gold and then copper and then bled out of the sky entirely. It was after supper, with the fire low, that Bruce told us the name. He had been quiet most of the evening, and when he spoke, everyone went still the way you do for an old man who does not waste words. He said that his grandfather had logged this mountain, and his grandfather before that, and that there was a thing on the eastern face that the old families had a name for. The valley people called it a dog because dog was close enough. He said it was black and it was big, bigger than a man on all 4s, and it had eyes that took the firelight and gave it back red. He said it did not howl like a wolf. He said it howled like something trying to remember how. He told us his grandfather had seen it twice. The first time as a boy, when a logging crew of 11 men went up the eastern face in the autumn and 9 came down. The 2 who did not come down were the 2 who ran. The crew never logged the eastern face again, and the company sold the mountain rather than make them, and that, Bruce said, was why the old growth up there still stood when every other slope in the county had been cut to stumps twice over. The trees we were sleeping under were old because men had died to keep axes out of them. The second time, his grandfather had been a man grown, and he had been the one to find what was left of a girl from the next hollow who had gone up after a lost goat, and he had carried what he found down himself. And he had never described it to a living soul, and he had made his son promise, and his son had made Bruce promise, that no gardener would ever go up the eastern face alone, and no gardener would ever run from the thing that lived there. My whole life, Bruce said, I have kept to that. I am 79 years old. I have walked this mountain 10,000 times, and I am telling you, I would not be sitting at this fire tonight if some part of me had not believed all along that the day was coming when I would have to keep that promise out loud where someone could hear me do it. He looked around the circle, slow, taking each face. I think that day is close. I felt it in the quiet this afternoon. So you are going to listen to me now, all of you, the way I listened to my father. Lauren asked if he was trying to scare us, and she smiled when she said it, but her hands were tight around her cup. No, Bruce said. I am trying to teach you. There is only one thing you need to keep in your head up here, and I want you to keep it. Stay still, go quiet, let it pass. The dog hunts what runs. He said it slow, and he made each of us repeat it, going around the fire, and we did, half laughing, the way you humor an old man. Stay still, go quiet, let it pass. The dog hunts what runs. I said it too. I want you to remember that I said it, because everything that kept me alive in the days after came down to those 4 short sentences, and everything I lost came down to the people who could not hold to them when it counted. The fire burned down. One by one they went to their tents. I took the first watch out of habit, sitting up with the embers, and somewhere past midnight the birds started. Not stopped, started. I want to be precise about this. In a healthy forest at night you hear an undercurrent. Insects, the small movements of small animals, the wind working the canopy. It is never truly silent, and for the first part of the night it was not silent. Then, all at once, every night sound on the eastern side of the clearing cut off, as if a hand had closed over the forest, and into that hole in the world came a single long cry. It was not a wolf. Bruce was right about that. It started low, almost a moan, and it climbed and broke and climbed again, and there was something in the breaks that sounded like it was reaching for a shape it could not quite make, like a voice that had been a voice once and had forgotten the trick of it. It came from inside the tree line on the eastern face, close, closer than the valley, closer than half a mile, close enough that I stood up without deciding to. And every tent in that meadow went still in the way that means the people inside are awake and holding their breath. I stood there with the dead fire at my back, and I understood the quiet then, all of it, the whole shape of it. The woods do not go silent for a wolf. They go silent for the thing the wolves are afraid of. Nobody slept much after that. By gray first light the group had gathered around the cold pit, and the easy talk of the day before was gone. Christina had her map out and was already saying we should cut the loop short and come down the western trail, 2 days instead of 4. Alan disagreed. Alan always disagreed with turning back, I would learn. The way some men cannot stand to leave a thing unfinished. Martin made a joke that did not land. Lauren did not laugh at it. I went to look at the eastern tree line while they argued. I found the track 40 feet inside the timber, pressed into the soft black ground beside a seep spring. I have tracked every large animal that walks that mountain. I know a black bear's print front and back, the way the toes spread, the way the claws sit out from the pad. This was not that. It was a canid track, the long oval of a dog or a wolf, but the size was wrong in a way that made my stomach drop. It was wider than my spread hand. The claw marks dug deep and forward, the way claws dig when a thing carries real weight, and there was only the one. I cast a wide circle and found no others, no trail in, no trail out. The single print sitting alone in the mud, as if the animal had set 1 foot down to look at our camp and then thought better of it and lifted away into nothing. I did not tell them about the print. That was the last thing I let go, and it is the one I cannot forgive, because by then I knew better, and I told myself I was protecting their mourning instead of admitting I was protecting my own need to believe in bears. There is a kind of cowardice that wears the mask of kindness. I wore it all the way up that mountain, and 4 people are in the ground for it, and 2 are not even that. We broke camp and moved. Christina won the argument by sheer practical force, and we started the western descent, but the western trail first climbed before it fell, up over a saddle and along an exposed ridge where the trees thinned and the wind came hard. Evelyn's bell rang at every step. By mid-morning I had begun to hate the sound of it. I asked her, as gently as I could, to muffle it, and she looked at me strangely and tucked it inside her jacket, and for an hour we walked in something close to silence. It was on that ridge that Lauren went off the trail. She had stepped aside to find a private spot, the way you do, just below the crest where a stand of spruce gave cover. We were strung out along the saddle. I was at the front with Alan. The last anyone saw of her clearly was Martin, who lifted a hand to her and turned back to the climb. 2 minutes, maybe 3. When Christina called the count at the next cairn and came up 1, we were not even worried yet. We called her name. The wind took it. We backtracked to the spruce stand, and her pack was there, sitting upright against a trunk where she had leaned it, and Lauren was not. There were no signs of a fall. The ground below the ridge was open, and we could see a long way down, and there was nothing on it. There was no blood. There was no struggle. There was a pack leaned neat against a tree and a woman gone out of the middle of a forest in the middle of the day with all of us within shouting distance. And on the moss beside the pack, pressed deep, that same single wide track, 1 print, pointed up the slope into the timber. I am going to ask you for something now, and I am going to ask it plainly, the way Bruce asked us around that fire. If you have come this far with me walking this ridge at my shoulder, then you already feel how the air changed when we found that empty pack. You have not yet tapped the like on this. I can feel that the way I felt those eyes on the back of my neck on the saddle that afternoon. Tap it now, before I go on, because what comes next is the part where I stopped pretending it was a bear, and I would rather not walk into it alone. We searched until the light failed, which was the wrong choice, and I knew it was the wrong choice, and I made it anyway because you cannot tell 5 people to abandon a friend while there is still light to look by. We found nothing more, no second print, no third. The thing left exactly as much as it wanted us to find and not one mark more. And that, more than the size of the track, is what told me what we were dealing with. A bear does not curate, a wolf does not leave a message. This thing was telling us a story on the ground, and the story was that it could take one of us out of the middle of our own line and leave the rest untouched, any time it pleased. We called her name until our voices went raw. We split into pairs and quartered the slope below the ridge, and I made them stay in sight of one another, because the one thing I knew for certain now was that being alone on that mountain was a sentence. Christina kept her composure the way she kept everything, in tight, neat order, marking each square of ground we cleared on her map with a pencil, her hand steady, her face a careful blank, and only her breathing gave her away too fast and too even, a woman counting her breaths to keep from screaming. Martin stopped joking. That, more than anything, told the others how bad it was. When Martin Barry goes quiet, you are in real trouble. And Martin went quiet that afternoon and stayed quiet, and Lauren had been his guest, his responsibility, the young friend he had vouched for. And he carried her empty pack the whole search and would not let anyone else take it. By the time the light went amber and then thin, we had covered everything a fallen or injured person could have reached, and there was nothing. No torn brush, no slide marks, no blood, and I keep saying no blood because the no blood was the worst of it. A predator that kills leaves sign. This thing did not kill where we could see, it removed. It reached into the bright middle of an ordinary afternoon, and it removed Lauren Payne from the world, and it left her pack leaning neat against a tree like a coat hung on a hook by someone who fully intended to come back for it. We made a cold camp that night, no fire, packed in tight under a rock overhang on the lee side of the saddle. Bruce sat with his back to the stone and his old bone-handled knife across his knees, and he was not afraid in the way the rest of us were afraid. He was something worse than afraid. He was certain. It will not rush us, he said into the gloom. It is not hungry the way an animal is hungry. It takes its time. It likes the taking. He looked around at our faces in the last gray light. Stay still. Go quiet. Let it pass. You hold to that, and most of you walk off this mountain. You run, and it will run you down one at a time, and it will enjoy every one. Martin made a sound that was meant to be a laugh. And if a man has to, he said, let us say, answer a call of nature, then you do it close, Bruce said, and you do it quiet, and you do not go to where it wants you to go. He had stopped speaking in the careful way of a guest and started speaking in the flat, certain way of a man on his own ground. I trusted that voice more than I trusted my 19 years and my single useless print. The night went on a long time. The wind died near the small hours, and the forest below us fell into that same total stillness, that hole in the world, and we all heard the cry again. Once, far down the eastern hollow, and then, an hour later, much closer, from the timber not 200 yards below our overhang. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. We held to the rule with our whole bodies, 6 strangers and 1 old man pressed into the cold rock, and the thing circled below us in the blackness and did not come up, and I began to let myself believe the rule would hold. And then Evelyn's bell rang, one clear bright note out of the absolute silence, from somewhere down the slope, well below us, 50 yards or more into the trees. A second note. A third. The bell she had tucked into her jacket, the bell that had not left her body since the trailhead. I felt her go rigid beside me in the gloom, and her hands flew to her chest, and the bell was there, against her, silent, both her hands wrapped around it to keep it still. The ringing came from down the slope. It rang the rhythm of a walking step, bright and even, coming up, and underneath the bell, between the notes, there was a wet sound, low and patient and pleased, the sound of a large mouth working over something, and I understood, in the cold under that rock, that the thing had found a way to wear our own sounds against us. I am going to tell you the rest fast, because that is how it happened, and because some of it I have only ever been able to look at sideways. Bruce moved first. He put his mouth close to my ear and he said one word, west, and then he was up and moving, low and quiet, The way a man moves when he has hunted his whole life and is now the hunted and knows the difference does not have to be fatal. We went after him, all of us, out from under the overhang and along the lee of the ridge in the blackness, away from the bell, away from the wet sound, holding to the rule. Stay still when you can, go quiet always. We did not run. God help me, we did not run, and that is the only reason any voice survives to tell you this. We lost Alan an hour before dawn. He did not break the rule. I want to be fair to him because the dead deserve fairness, and Alan was a good man who only ever wanted to reach the top of things. We were crossing a boulder field, slow, spread out for the footing, and Alan was at the high edge, and the thing came across the slope above him out of the last of the night, and it did not howl, and it did not rush. It simply was there, between two breaths, a low black weight the size of a calf, with a head too long and a back too high, and its eyes took what little light there was and gave it back the color of a coal. Alan did the thing you cannot help but do. He looked it in the eye, and it took him the way it had taken Lauren, fast and almost gentle, and the only sound was stone shifting where his feet had been, and then nothing. And then the boulder field was empty at the high edge and we were 5. I have thought about Alan more than any of the others, because Alan kept the rule. He did not run. He did not cry out. He stood his ground the way Bruce had told us to, and it took him anyway. And for a long time that broke something in me. Because if keeping the rule could not save Alan, then the rule was a lie. And there was no reason in any of it. It was Bruce who set me straight, later, in the gray light at the wall, in the last hour I had with him. He said the rule was never a promise. He said it was only the best odds a person had, and that the mountain did not deal in certainties, only in odds, and that Alan had drawn a bad card from a deck that was honest. Stay still, go quiet, let it pass. It will save most of you, Bruce had said at the fire. Most. He had never once said all. I had heard the word most and chosen to hear the word all, the way I had chosen to hear bear, the way I had chosen all my life. To hear the gentler half of every hard true thing. Bruce did not stop. Bruce understood that stopping was a way of running. We went down off the ridge into the eastern hollow, which was the wrong direction, toward the thing instead of away, because Bruce knew something the rest of us did not. There was an old burying ground in that hollow, a church gone to its foundations 100 years back, and a low stone wall around a square of graves. Bruce believed, the way the old families believed, that the dog would not cross a wall the dead had been laid behind. I do not know if that is true. I know what I saw, which is that we reached that crumbling wall as the first real light came into the trees, and we put the stones at our backs, and the thing came down the hollow after us and stopped at the wall and would not cross it, and paced the length of it on the far side, back and forth, with the wet, patient sound coming out of it the whole time. The walk down into that hollow was the longest mile of my life. We went in single file with Bruce in the lead, and the thing came with us. I never once saw it on that walk. I only knew it was there the way you know a hand is near your face in a lightless room, by the pressure of it, by the way the forest emptied of every other living sound ahead of us and behind us, a moving circle of silence with the 5 of us at its center and the thing somewhere along its edge, keeping pace, in no hurry, hurting without ever quite showing itself. Twice I heard it breathe. Once I heard a stone turn over off to my right, at the level of my own knee, close enough to touch, and I did not turn my head because Bruce had said not to, and turning your head is a small running, and I had buried enough people who ran. It was full light by then, and I saw it plain, and I am not going to describe it to you any more than I have, because the describing is how it gets into your sleep, and I would not do that to you. I will only tell you that there was nothing of an animal in its eyes. There was attention. There was something that knew us and counted us and was in no hurry. It paced the wall like a thing that has all the time in the world and knows it, and now and then it would stop and turn its long head and look at one of us in particular and hold that look, and you could feel it choosing the way you feel a cold draft find the one gap in a closed house. We lost Christina and Martin at the wall, and that one I carry worst because that one was the rule breaking. The sun was up and the thing had not crossed in an hour, and Martin convinced himself it had gone. He stood, and he stretched, and he made one more joke, his voice shaking under it. A man talking to keep the fear from showing on the outside while it ate him on the inside, and Christina put her hand on his arm to pull him down, and they were both upright and moving for half a second at the broken place in the wall where the stones had fallen. That is all it needs, half a second of moving, at the low place. They ran without ever meaning to run, 3 steps toward what they thought was safety, and the thing was over the fallen stones and on them before I could draw a breath to call out. I will not tell you the rest of that. The rule is the rule. The dog hunts what runs, and for 1/2 of 1 second, 2 good and frightened people ran, and the mountain kept them. Then it was Bruce, and Evelyn, and me, behind the unbroken part of the wall, in the full morning light, and the thing on the far side, watching. Bruce knew he was not going to walk off that mountain. I think he had known since the trailhead, since he asked me about the birds. He took the brass bell off Evelyn, gently, the way you take a thing from a child, and he untied it from inside her jacket, and he closed her hands and made her hold them closed. Then he looked at me and he said it one more time, the whole of it slow, so I would carry it. Stay still, go quiet, let it pass. And then he did the bravest and worst thing I have ever seen a person do. He rang the bell, loud, and he walked away from us, up the hollow, away from the graves, ringing it, drawing the long black shape of the thing off down the wall after the bright sound of him. And he did not look back at us once, not once, because looking back is a kind of stopping, and Bruce Gardner never stopped in his life. I did not follow him. Evelyn tried, and I held her down behind the stones with my whole weight and my hand over her mouth. And we stayed still, and we went quiet, and we let it pass, and the bell went up the hollow and into the timber and got smaller and smaller, and then it stopped, all at once, in the middle of a note. Evelyn and I walked off that mountain the next day, down the western trail in the open light, slow, never running, jumping at every quiet patch in the birdsong all the long way down. She lived 4 more years. She never went into the woods again, and she never spoke of it, and when she passed, she left me the bell. The one Bruce had untied from her, the one he had carried up that hollow, which somebody from the search had found in the leaves with the clapper still in it and no other sign of Bruce Gardner anywhere on the mountain, then or since. That is the bell in my coat pocket. That is the one I packed full of wax so that it can never ring again because I have learned what answers a bell on that mountain. I am an old man now myself, older than Alan was. The years have done to my body what years do. There are mornings I cannot get out of the chair without help. And there are whole afternoons I sit by the window not moving at all, because moving costs more than it is worth. I am still. I am quiet. I let the days pass. And lately, in the long evenings, I have started to hear it again. The birds outside my window, the small ordinary night sounds of an ordinary town, all of it cutting off at once into that hole in the world I have not heard in 11 years. The quiet that is not peace. The quiet that means something is close. I held to the rule and it saved me when I was young and could run and chose not to. Stay still, go quiet, let it pass. I built my whole long life around those 4 sentences. And only now, when I cannot rise from this chair, when still and quiet are the only things my body knows how to be, do I understand what Bruce understood at the trailhead when he asked me about the birds. The thing that saves you is the same thing that kills you. It is out there in the yard tonight. The birds have stopped. And for the first time in 11 years, it is not walking away. It is walking toward me, and I cannot run. The last photograph on Danielle Johnston's camera is white. Not a glare, not a thumb across the lens. White the way a wall of fur fills a frame when the thing wearing it has come close enough to breathe on the person holding the shutter. I have looked at that photograph more times than I will ever admit out loud. The camera sits in a drawer at the ranger station now, behind the spare batteries and the laminated trail maps, because I do not like the way the screen looks back at me when I leave it on the desk overnight. My name does not matter much for this. What matters is that I wore the green and the gray of this park for 19 years, and I walked the high ridges of the Pennsylvania Appalachians until I knew them the way you know the inside of your own mouth. I knew where the water still ran in August. I knew which switchbacks lied about how far they had left to climb. I believed, the way a younger man believes, that I knew everything that lived up there. I want to tell you about 6 people who came to hike my mountain one summer, and I want to tell you about the thing that was already waiting on it when they arrived. They checked in at the trailhead station a little after 7 in the morning. The light was thin and gray through the hemlocks, and the air had that cold thread running through it that you get on the high ground even in July. I was the one who took their permit and counted heads. Craig Larson did the talking. He was 46, broad through the shoulders, the kind of man who organizes the trip and carries the heaviest pack and never lets anyone see him tired. He had a list on a folded sheet of paper, and he read me the names like he was proud of every one of them. Behind him stood Ann Chapman, 53, a nurse from the valley who had the steadiest pair of eyes I have ever seen on a person. She kept counting the group under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. She did it without thinking, the way some people touch their pocket to feel for their keys. I noticed it then. I would have reason to remember it later. There was Joan Hanson, 68, a retired school teacher with a whistle on a lanyard and a hearing aid in her left ear that she kept adjusting with one finger. There was Terry George, 59, who carried a rifle slung over one shoulder and a smile that told you he thought the whole permit process was a waste of a grown man's morning. And there was Danielle Johnston, 34, the youngest of them, with a camera around her neck that probably cost more than my truck. She kept lifting it toward the trees and the mist and the wet ferns, looking for the photograph that would make the climb worth it. I remember small things about each of them, the way you remember the faces in a photograph you did not know would matter. Craig had a wedding ring he turned on his finger when he talked, around and around, a nervous habit in a man who otherwise gave nothing away. Anne wore hiking boots that had been resoled more than once, the boots of a person who had walked a great many miles and intended to walk a great many more. Joan corrected Terry's grammar twice while I stood there gently, out of 40 years of habit, and Terry took it the way you take it from a favorite aunt. They were not strangers thrown together. They were a group that had hiked together for years, and they trusted each other, and that trust is the thing I think about most now. Because trust makes you slow to believe that the danger is real. Trust makes you wait for the others to be afraid first. And last there was Keith Dean. Keith was 74 years old. He moved slow because of a bad right knee, and he leaned on a carved walking stick that was darker than his hands, and he did not say much while Craig handled the talking. But when I asked the group the question I asked every group, the question about whether they had hiked this range before, it was Keith who answered, and the others went quiet to let him. He said his father had hunted these hills. He said his grandfather had too. He said the family stopped coming up the backside of the ridge in 1950-something, and when I asked him why, he looked at me for a long moment, longer than the question deserved. Then he told me the thing I have carried for 19 years. He said, "A white one does not chase you, it waits for you to run. You walk out of these hills slow and quiet, or you do not walk out at all." I laughed. I am ashamed of that now, but I laughed because that is what a young ranger does when an old man says something that does not fit on a permit form. Craig laughed too, and clapped Keith on the shoulder, and said something about Keith never letting a campfire go without one of his stories. Terry George patted the rifle on his shoulder and said anything white up there would make an easy target against the green. Everyone smiled. Even Joan, who had only half heard it through the bad ear, smiled along. Keith did not smile. Keith looked at the rifle on Terry's shoulder, and then he looked at me, and he said it again, slower. "Walk out slow, or you do not walk out." I told them the rules. Stay on the marked trail, hang your food, be down off the high meadow by Sunday, because Sunday night a front was coming in and the radio would lose them up there. I gave Craig my number on the back of the permit. I watched the 6 of them go up the trail in a loose line, Craig at the front, Ann at the back counting heads, Keith in the middle setting a slow and steady pace with that carved stick. I want you to remember that line they walked in. 6 people, Craig leading, Ann counting, Keith setting the pace, because 2 days later when I went up that same trail to find them, there were only 5 sets of boot prints in the mud at the meadow's edge, and every one of them was pointed back down the mountain the way you point when you are running. I have replayed that morning 1,000 times. I have asked myself what I would have done differently if I had not laughed. The honest answer is nothing. I would have done nothing differently because in 19 years of wearing that uniform I had filed reports on bear, on lost children, on a man who fell from a ledge and a woman who drowned in a calm pool of slow water. I had never once filed a report on a thing that walks on 2 legs and stands taller than a doorway and goes white the way old bone goes white. I had no box on my forms for that. The first night up there, the group made camp where they were supposed to, in the flat saddle below the high meadow, and by Craig's later account it was a good night. They built a fire, Terry cooked. Danielle got her photograph of the sun going down red behind the far ridge, and Joan led them in a story or two, and Keith sat with his bad knee stretched toward the warmth and said little. It was Danielle who heard the first knock. She told me about it weeks afterward, in a hospital room, with her hands wrapped around a paper cup of water that she never once drank. She said it sounded like someone striking a fence post with a baseball bat, one single hard crack, far off in the trees to the north. She said everyone went still. Terry said it was a falling branch. Keith said nothing at all, which Danielle remembered because Keith always had something to say. Then it came again, closer, one knock, and from somewhere to the south, across the whole black width of the saddle, an answer. Knock. 2 of them. calling to each other across the camp. With the 6 people sitting in the middle, Craig got the fire built up high. That was the wrong thing to do, though none of them knew it then. A fire tells the night exactly where you are, and it ruins your eyes for everything beyond the reach of its light. They sat in that small bright circle with the whole weight of the mountain pressed against their backs, and they listened to the knocks move. North, south, then north again, but closer. Then a long stretch of nothing, which was worse because nothing meant it had stopped moving and started watching. Danielle said Keith never once looked out into the trees. He looked at the fire. She asked him later why, and Keith said, "You do not look for the eyes, because if you find them you will run, and running is exactly what it is waiting for." He had said the very same thing to me at the trailhead, and I had laughed. Danielle did not laugh. Danielle had heard the second knock answer the first, and she understood that there were 2 of them out there in the night, and that the 6 people at the fire were sitting in the space between. Joan, who had her hearing aid out for the night, slept through all of it. The others did not sleep at all. And when the gray light finally came up and they crawled out of their tents, stiff and unrested, they found that the food they had hung between 2 hemlocks, 15 feet off the ground, the way I had told them, was gone. Not torn down, not scattered the way a bear leaves a mess. The rope was still tied. The bag was simply gone from the end of it, lifted off as neatly as you would lift a coat from a hook, and pressed flat into the soft black mud at the base of the tree, where no person had walked, was a single footprint, bare, wider than 2 of Craig's boots set side by side, with 5 toes splayed in the mud and a heel sunk so deep that Terry George, who did not believe in anything he could not shoot, went quiet and did not pick his rifle back up for a long while. I have seen a great many tracks. Bear, both kinds. Cat, the big one they say does not live here anymore but does. Deer beyond counting. I know how to read the story a print tells, the weight and the gait and the direction of the thing that left it. Craig sent me a photograph of that footprint from his phone before they started down, while he still had 1 bar of signal on the saddle, and I have it still. It is not a bear. The toes are wrong, the arch is wrong. The depth is wrong, because a thing does not sink a heel that far into packed summer mud unless it weighs as much as a small car and walks upright on 2 legs. Over the years I took that photograph to every expert I could find. Most would not put their name to an answer. The ones who would use the word unknown. One old man who had spent his whole life in these hills looked at it for a long time and handed it back to me and said only that his people had a name for the white one, and that he would not say it out loud in a building with windows, and then he left. Craig made the call I would have made. He said they were going down, all of them, that morning. The trouble was Keith's knee. The trouble was the 8 miles of trail between the saddle and my station. The trouble was that something on that mountain had spent the whole night learning exactly how many of them there were, and exactly how slow the slowest one could move. They never made it down. I did not know any of this on the Saturday. On the Saturday, I was at the station doing paperwork and listening to the front roll in early, a full day ahead of what the forecast had promised, and I remember thinking about the 6 of them up in the saddle and hoping Craig had the sense to come down before the weather closed the high ground in. Craig had the sense. The mountain simply did not let him use it. What I can tell you about that Saturday I have stitched together from 3 people who lived through it, and from the things I saw with my own 2 eyes when I finally went up. I am going to tell it to you the way it happened to them, because you deserve to feel the floor tilt the way theirs did. They broke camp fast. Craig put Keith and Joan at the front of the line where he could set the pace to the slowest walker, which was the right call and a kind one. He put Terry at the back with the rifle. Danielle walked in the middle with her camera, and Anne walked beside her, counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. For the first mile, nothing. The trail dropped down off the saddle into a stand of old hemlock so thick that the morning never fully reached the ground. The light down there was the color of pond water. Danielle said it was the kind of place where you lower your voice without deciding to. It was Anne who noticed the count was wrong. She had been doing it for 2 days. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It was a nurse's habit, the same way she would count beds on a ward. And somewhere in that hemlock stand, walking, she counted and got 7. She stopped. She counted again. Craig at the front, Keith and Joan ahead of her, Danielle beside her, Terry at the back. That was 5 plus herself. 6. She told herself she had miscounted. She started walking again, and she counted again, and she got 6. And then a few steps later she counted and got 7. There was something walking with them in the trees, pacing them. keeping to the thick green just off the trail, matching them stride for stride, close enough that for one heartbeat her counting brain had simply added it to the group, the way you add a person who belongs. She made herself keep walking. That was the hardest thing she had ever done, she told me. Every animal part of her wanted to turn and look, to find the shape of the seventh, to know it. But she had felt the size of that footprint under her own hand at the camp that morning, and she understood that to look was to acknowledge, and to acknowledge was to start a clock she did not want started. So she watched the back of Danielle's jacket, and she walked, and beside her, just inside the green, something tall kept exact time with her boots. When she sped up, it sped up. When she slowed, it slowed. It was not stalking them the way a cat stalks, it was studying them. It was learning the rhythm of how a group of frightened people moves before they have even decided to be frightened. She did not scream. I want you to understand the kind of person Ann Chapman was. She did not scream. She reached forward and took Danielle by the wrist and squeezed once, the way you squeeze a patient's hand to tell them to stay calm without telling them why. And she said, very quietly, "Do not run. Whatever happens, do not run." She did not know yet that she was repeating Keith's words back to the group. She only knew in her bones that running was the worst thing any of them could do. I want to stop the story right here for one breath, because I have been talking for a while now and I have noticed you have stayed with me through every step of it, all the way up into those black hemlocks, and you have not once tapped that like button down there. If this is keeping you in your chair the way it kept me out of my sleep for 19 years, do me one small thing and let me know you are out there in the night listening with me. Then we go back up the mountain together, because this is where it gets worse. Danielle lifted her camera. It was instinct. It was the same instinct that had made her photograph the sunset and the ferns and the mist. There was something enormous and pale moving through the trees to her right, keeping pace, and the part of her brain that had spent 10 years learning to capture things lifted the camera toward it before the rest of her could say no. She got one frame, the white photograph, the one in my drawer. A wall of pale fur filling the whole frame, and at the top edge of it, almost out of view, the lower half of a face that was not a bear's face and was not a man's face and had a mouth that was open. The flash went off. She had it set to fire in low light. In that pond-colored gloom under the hemlocks, the flash went off like a gunshot of white light, and the thing in the trees that had been content to walk beside them for a mile, patient, counting them the way Ann counted, decided that the time for walking was over. It hit Terry George first. Terry was at the back. Terry had the rifle. Terry was 59 years old, and he had hunted his whole life, and he had said at the trailhead that anything white would make an easy target against the green, and when the thing came out of the trees behind him, he did the one thing his whole life had taught him to do. He ran. He ran, and he raised the rifle while he ran, and he never got the chance to fire it. I found the rifle 3 weeks later, 40 feet up in the crook of a dead oak, the barrel bent into a shape that no fall could explain. I never found Terry. I am sorry to tell you that. In 19 years, I never found a single piece of Terry George, and his wife still calls the station every July, and I still do not have anything to tell her. The rest of them did the only thing that saved them. They froze. Craig, at the front, turned and saw the green swallow Terry, and he understood in one terrible instant that Keith had been right. He threw his arms wide to stop the others. He hissed the word walk, and Keith Dean, 74 years old, with a bad knee and a carved stick, was already walking, slow and steady, down the trail, not looking back, not breaking stride, the way you walk past a stray dog you do not want to wake. "Walk out slow," Keith said, to all of them, not loud. "It is fed now. Walk." Danielle could not make her legs work at first. She told me she stood frozen with the camera still raised, the white image burned onto the little screen, and she was certain she was going to die in that exact spot with $1,000 of glass hanging around her neck. It was Joan who saved her. Joan, 68, who had not heard Terry and did not fully understand what had just happened, simply reached over and closed one hand around Danielle's arm and started walking, the way a teacher walks a frightened child out of a burning building, calm because the child needs the calm more than she needs the truth. Danielle let the camera fall against her chest and walked. Joan's other hand went to the whistle on her lanyard, the way it had gone 100 times on 100 trails, the thing you blow when a hiker is lost and you want to be found. And then Joan made herself let it go. No noise. She had understood that much without being told. The thing on this mountain did not come to noise. The thing on this mountain came to fear. No noise. And for a few minutes, it worked. They walked. Ann walked beside Danielle with one hand locked around her wrist. Joan walked, her bad ear toward the trees, mercifully not hearing the wet sounds the rest of them were trying not to hear. They walked down out of the hemlock stand and into a clearer slope of birch, and the thing did not follow. For a few hundred yards they let themselves believe it was over. The hemlocks thinned. The light came back, ordinary gray daylight, and the birch slope opened ahead of them with the trail running clean down through it toward the low country, and Craig allowed himself to think they had paid the price and bought their way out. He counted them now too, the way Anne did. Himself, Keith, Joan, Danielle, Anne, 5. He kept his eyes on the trail and one hand near the knife on his belt that he knew, in his heart, was as useless as a toothpick, and he walked his people down toward the white trees, and he did not let himself look back at the green that had swallowed Terry. He believed the worst thing on the mountain was behind them now. He was walking them straight toward the other one. But there were two of them. Remember the first night? 2 knocks, one to the north, one to the south. The second one was waiting in the birches. I crossed paths with them on the lower trail an hour before I knew anything was wrong. I had hiked up from the station because the radio had gone quiet and the front was coming in mean and early, and I wanted eyes on the group before the rain closed the high ground. I came up the switchbacks fast, and where the birch slope flattens out into the last stretch of meadow before the trail drops home, I came around a stand of mountain laurel and nearly walked straight into Anne Chapman. I will never forget her face. She had her finger to her lips, not a word, not a sound. Behind her, strung out across the meadow in a slow and silent line, were the others, walking the way Keith had taught them. Joan, Danielle, with no camera now, both hands empty. Craig at the front, Keith setting the pace. 5 of them, I counted, 5. And Anne mouthed the number Terry to me, just the name. And I understood. I have been around enough fear in 19 years to know the difference between people who are scared and people who are surviving. These 5 were surviving. They were holding themselves at the exact edge of a calm that was costing them everything they had, and the calm was the only thing keeping them alive. And I knew before I saw anything in the trees that whatever was up here did not respond to noise or guns or running, but to that one ancient animal trigger, the sight of prey breaking and bolting. So I did what they did. I turned. I took my place at the back of their slow and silent line, and I walked. That is when I saw it. It stood at the tree line on the right side of the meadow, at the edge of the laurel. And it was not in the trees, it was simply standing there in the open gray light watching us go, and it was white, not the white of snow. The white of something that has lived so long out of the sun that the color has gone out of it entirely. A yellowed bone white, with patches where the fur had thinned and you could see gray hide beneath. It stood taller than the laurel behind it. Its arms hung past its knees, and its face, which I will spend the rest of my life trying to forget, was watching us with a patience that was so much worse than hunger. It was not deciding whether to take us, it was deciding whether it needed to. I had spent 19 years telling lost hikers there was nothing in these woods that wanted to hurt them, and I had believed it, and in one moment at the edge of that meadow every word of it turned to ash in my mouth. The thing was old. That is the part I have never been able to make anyone understand. It did not move like a young and hungry animal. It moved like something that had watched 100 summers of people come up its mountain, that had learned us the way we learn the weather, that knew it had all the time in the world and that we had almost none. Its eyes found mine across that open ground, and there was a patience in them that no animal has and that no man has either, and I understood, standing there, that Keith's grandfather had stopped coming up the back of this ridge for a reason that had nothing to do with the hunting going bad. We walked. God help me, we walked. Across the whole open width of that meadow, with the thing standing 30 yards off our right shoulders, we walked at the pace Keith's bad knee allowed, slow, steady, no faster, no slower, and the white thing turned its head to track us and did not take one step. I have crossed a great deal of open ground in my life. I have never crossed anything like that meadow. Every step was a negotiation with my own body. The grass was wet, and it dragged at our boots, and the front was coming in over the far ridge in a gray wall. And the light kept changing as the clouds ate the sun, so that the white shape at the tree line seemed to brighten and fade, like something seen through deep water. Nobody spoke, nobody looked at it directly. We had learned by then to keep it at the edge of our vision, to know where it was the way you know where a wasp is without ever staring at it. Keith set the pace with his stick, one slow plant and step at a time, and we matched him, and the thing matched us, turning only its head, and for 90 yards it was the most patient creature I have ever shared the earth with. We were 40 feet from the tree line on the far side, 40 feet from the trail that dropped down toward my station and the valley and the world of permits and forms, when Joan Hansen's hearing aid began to whine. It was a thin, rising, electronic shriek, the feedback sound they make when the battery dies. In the silence of that meadow, it was the loudest thing in the world. Joan's hands flew to her ear, and the white thing at the tree line went rigid, and its head came around, and for the first time it took a step toward us. Craig Larson did not run. Understand that. To the very end, Craig Larson did not run. Craig Larson turned and walked back. Against everything his body was screaming, walked back toward the thing, slow, with his arms out wide, making himself big and slow and present, putting himself between that creature and the rest of us so that the four people behind him could keep walking toward the trees. The last thing Craig said, he said to me over his shoulder without turning his head. He said, "Get them down. Walk them down." I got them down. The rain hit us halfway down. It came in cold and sideways and turned the trail to a brown ribbon of running water, and still I would not let them hurry. That was the cruelest part of all of it. Every instinct any of us had was screaming to run now, to use the rain and the roar of it as cover and simply go. But I had seen what running bought Terry George, and so I made them walk. I walked behind Joan with my hands on her shoulders. Anne walked in front with Danielle. Keith took the lead because Keith was the only one of us whose body had no other gear, and his slow, steady pace down that washed-out trail was the metronome that kept the rest of us from breaking. I have thanked God for that bad knee more times than I have thanked God for anything else in my life. I will not tell you what I heard behind us in that meadow, because you do not need it and I do not want to give it to anyone else to carry. I will only tell you that I walked Anne and Joan and Danielle and Keith down off that mountain at the slowest pace of any descent of my life, and that the white thing did not follow us past the tree line, and that the rain came in hard before we reached the bottom and washed the trail clean behind us as if the mountain wanted no record of where we had been. 4 of them lived. Anne Chapman, who counted. Joan Hanson, who never heard the worst of it. Danielle Johnston, whose camera I pried from the mud at the meadow's edge a week later, with one white photograph left on it. And Keith Dean, 74 years old, with a bad knee and a carved stick, who could not run if his life depended on it, and so walked, and so lived. I have thought about that every single day since. The bad knee saved him. The thing that should have made him the slowest, the weakest, the first to fall, was the one thing that kept his body from doing what Terry's body did. He could not run, so he walked, and the mountain let him pass. For 19 years I told myself a comforting thing. I told myself that we lived because we walked, that Keith was right, that the white ones do not chase, that they wait for you to run, and that the lesson of those 3 days was a lesson about keeping your head, about being slow and quiet and patient, about beating the thing at its own game. I retired last spring. I have a small house down in the valley now, at the bottom of the long slope where the meadow's water eventually runs. It is a good house. It is quiet. Anne still counts. She told me last year that she cannot stop, that she counts the people in any room she enters, that she counts the cars in a parking lot, that some nights she wakes counting 6 and lies still in the lightless room until she remembers that it was always going to be 5. Joan got a new hearing aid and has never once worn it. Danielle does not take photographs anymore, and Keith Dean passed away 2 winters ago, in his sleep at the age of 76, the only one of us the mountain did not take on its own terms. At his service I let myself believe the story was finished. I thought we had carried it as far as it was ever going to go. 3 nights ago I was standing at my kitchen window with the lights off, looking up the slope at the tree line behind my yard, the way an old ranger looks at a tree line out of habit. And something came out of the trees. It came out slow. It crossed the open ground at the back of my yard at a pace I knew, a slow and steady and patient pace, no faster, no slower, the pace of a thing that has learned there is no need to hurry. It was white in the moonlight, yellowed bone white, taller than the fence, and it did not look at the house with hunger. It looked at it with patience. I stood very still at that window. I am an old man now, and my knees are not what they were, and I could not run if my life depended on it. And as I watched that pale shape cross my yard in the moonlight, I understood that the thing I had told myself for 19 years was a comfort I had built out of luck and then called wisdom. We did not survive because we were clever. We survived because on that day it was full, and it was curious, and it decided that letting us go would teach it more than killing us would. And it was right. It learned the one slow, patient pace that does not trigger the chase. It learned to come down quiet. It learned to wait at a tree line and let the prey believe it was safe. We did not live because we beat it, you understand. We did not outsmart it. It let us walk, the way you let a thing go when you have decided you would rather follow it home. It watched how we moved. It watched the one slow, steady pace that kept us calm, and it learned. It learned the only thing it did not already know. It did not chase us because we walked, and now it walks too, slow, quiet, patient, coming down out of the high ground one careful step at a time, toward the valley, toward the houses, toward my window in the night, the way I taught it to be.